Chapter 40. Many years later, at the edge of the cliff of that lonely peak, Ning Ke recalled the scene when he first saw Mistress Jian. He could not help but look back and sigh for a long time, with a self-mocking smile and emotion on his face. At that time, he was full of longing as he walked up the stairs. He felt that he was the legendary prostitute with full luck tonight. As he walked, it was as if he could see the beautiful courtesan waiting for him behind the bead curtain. However, he did not expect that when the little maidservant pushed open the red door and lifted the bead curtain, he would see a woman like that. The wrinkles at the corners of her eyes were very clear, but her figure was maintained to perfection. Her large breasts, slender waist, and plump buttocks were wrapped in a cloth garment, but her forehead was extremely wide, like a smooth sand dune in the grassland. Her eyes were simple and amiable, and there was a layer of extremely light hair below her straight nose and above her thick lips. She wasn't ugly, but she definitely couldn't be said to be a 1 in 100 beauty. She had nothing to do with the courtesan queen. He liked beautiful girls of the same age, and he also liked older ladies. Even a charming mature woman over 30 would have her own style. However, Mistress Jian didn't belong to any of these three categories. She was just an ordinary woman over 40 with a calm and composed demeanor that was very much like a man. Ning Ke was slightly stunned and immediately felt that his expression was a little impolite. He forced himself to calm down and put on a sincere smile. He bowed to the woman with hands folded in front and asked, "Mistress Jian, what can I do for you? Which family are you from?" Mistress Jian looked at him and asked with a smile. Ning Ke did not hide anything and told her about his background. Although there are many places recommended by the military ministry this year, you can pass the initial assessment of the academy. I think you are also a talented person. Mistress Jian looked at him with approval and continued, "But since you come from the border town, you should not know who I am. You can quickly calm down at our first meeting." "Young man, you are really calm." It took Ning Ke a great deal of effort to lower his head. He deliberately avoided looking at her forehead that was wider than the grassland and the light hairs on her lips. He subconsciously said a few words of modesty when he heard these words. Through the woman's simple introduction and the young maidservant's arrogant embellishment, he finally understood why the people downstairs paid special attention to Mistress Jian's name. 30 years ago, when the new emperor of the South Jin Kingdom was crowned, a singing and dancing troupe named House of Red Sleeves won the most applause at the ceremony and became famous all over the world. 3 years later, the emperor of the Tang Empire wrote a letter to ask the House of Red Sleeves to move into the Tang Empire because there were many daughters of the Tang Empire in the House of Red Sleeves. The emperor of the South Jin Kingdom could not resist and could only agree. Since then, the House of Red Sleeves had been staying in Chang'an. For nearly 20 years, they only danced and sang for the Tang imperial court. They no longer participated in the grand events of other countries and gradually lost their fame among the people. But for the real nobles and officials, this song and dance troupe, which was specially summoned by the most powerful empire and stationed in the greatest city of Chang'an, was undoubtedly the best song and dance troupe in the world. Although the brothel they were in did not have a name, it would always be the #1 brothel in the world. Whether it was the envoy of the South Jin Kingdom, the officials from the Yueluan Kingdom who came to pay tribute, or the barbarian princes from the grassland, as long as they came to Chang'an, they would always come to this brothel to invite the girls from the House of Red Sleeves to sing and dance a few times. It was rumored that after the crown prince of the Yen Kingdom was sent to Chang'an as a hostage 7 years ago, he relied on the House of Red Sleeves to survive the first 2 years of his life. Mistress Jian was not the most popular courtesan in the world, but she was the leader of the House of Red Sleeves singing and dancing troupe and had trained countless courtesans in the world. "You are just a young boy. Since you want to enter the academy, your future is naturally promising. Why do you have to learn from those pedantic scholars? It seems that you will never become a famous scholar if you don't go to the brothel a few times. The smile on Mistress Jian's face seemed to be carved by a knife. No matter if her words were cold, questioning, or persuading, her smile was always calm and tranquil, and there were always so many crow's feet around her eyebrows. But Ning Ke could feel the subtle changes in the mood of the leader. He did not know why she had called him upstairs, but after hearing that he was about to participate in the academy entrance exam of the academy, the woman's tone subconsciously became stern. This kind of sternness was not hostile, but somewhat like an elder looking at a late learner. This kind of emotional change made him feel a little helpless and confused. After saluting with his hands folded in front, he softly explained, "I am from the Yueluan kingdom, but I have lived in Chang'an for more than 20 years. Of course, I know what kind of temperament you Tang men have. To put it nicely, you can say that you are generous, but to put it bluntly, you are too enthusiastic and too proud." Mistress Jian stopped smiling and looked at Ning Ke with a frown. Looking at the young and energetic face of the lad, she seemed to see the little green-robed scholar who rode a little black donkey and arrogantly walked into the Great Wall many years ago. She said with disappointment, "Do you know who that young man is? He is the only son of the master of the 7 noble families in Eastern City. He has endless pocket money in his wallet. He can be generous, but what about you? According to the temperament of you Tang people, you must want to return the invitation when you are invited. Even if you are short of money, if you meet him again next time, you must invite him back even if you have to sell all the books in your house. Am I right?" Ning Ke awkwardly scratched his head and secretly admired the woman's way of looking at things. Although he was not a typical Tang person, he still had a bit of Tang style in this kind of thing. Seeing him like this, Mistress Jian did not know why she was even more annoyed. She took off the ebony beads on her wrist and threw them on the couch. A series of questions came to him like a storm. "You haven't even fully grown your body and soul back to normal. How dare you walk into this kind of bone-destroying and soul-stealing place? You are so poor and you still want to spend money everywhere. Have you collected the tuition fees and accommodation fees of the academy? How is your preparation for the academy entrance exam? Did you buy the real questions? Which ones did you buy?" He had wanted to monopolize the top courtesan, but he met the mother of the top courtesan with a strong sense of morality. He was even scolded by the mother of the top courtesan. It was tragic no matter how he thought about it. If it had been another situation, Ning Ke might have muttered in his heart, "Even if you, Mistress Jian, have friends with influential people and have a high status, you are not my mother. Why do you scold me as soon as we meet?" However, Mistress Jian didn't use her power to oppress him. Instead, she behaved like an earnest, nervous, and nagging elder. There was a big pain written on her forehead. He was too embarrassed to refute her, so he stammered and said, "It's my first time in Chang'an. I was just curious. I just wanted to peek outside the building, but I didn't expect the sisters in the building to make fun of me. I was hot-headed and inexplicably walked in." Mistress Jian was slightly stunned. She turned to the little maidservant and coldly reprimanded, "His Majesty is holding a banquet for the return of Her Highness. This is such a big event. He just let those little bitches rest for a few days and practice dancing. Why are they so itchy? They even want to hook up with a young scholar." The little maidservant was a yes-man and did not dare to refute at all. Mistress Jian rubbed her eyebrows tiredly and looked up at Ning Ke, who was standing obediently at the door. She suddenly remembered that she had just glanced at the hall by chance and felt that the smell of the lad was somewhat similar to that of the dead man. She could not help but call out to him and ask him a few questions, but she did not know why she lost her temper for no reason. She did not expect that the lad would not argue or be angry, but obediently let her reprimand him. She could not help but laugh and waved her hand, saying, "Since you are curious, I will let someone take you to have a look." After you have seen it, go home early and rest. Chapter 41. Although Mistress Jian had become Aunt Jian, Ning Ke would not refuse her offer. He did not forget his real purpose of looking for a brothel in the Great Wall. Moreover, as a young man from the countryside, he was very satisfied to be able to visit the best brothel in Chang, unlike a VIP. Walking down the stairs of the West Wing, there was a very flat grassland behind the building. Passing through a white wall, a stream appeared under the starry sky. There were several small courtyards scattered on both sides of the stream. There was a faint singing mixed with the melodious sound of stringed bamboo. It must be the dancers who were preparing for the celebration in the palace. The maidservant was in a bad mood after being reprimanded. Seeing Ning Ke looking around with his hands behind his back like a tourist, her face became colder and colder. She said sarcastically, "I don't know what's wrong with Mistress Jian today. Why is she so nice to a poor man like you? You are a scholar, but you don't know how to refuse. Well, someone must be very thick-skinned to visit brothels when he is so poor." Since he was said to be thick-skinned, Ning Ke had to show it. He pretended that he did not hear the sarcasm in the maidservant's words and replied gently, "Since Mr. Ji is willing to treat me, I can't stop him. It's a simple thing between men. It sounds complicated, but it's actually very simple. You are just a boy. How dare you praise yourself as a man?" The maidservant laughed and said, "It's okay to be treated to a few cups of wine, but you even have to pay for it. He is not your relative, how could you do that?" Hearing this, Ning Ke could not help but think of the scene when he first met Li Yu in the small courtyard in the city of Wei. At that time, Li Yu was not a princess but a maidservant. Tonight there was another maidservant talking about these things. That scene did not happen many days ago. Why did it feel like it happened years ago? The maidservant had already returned to the palace. Countless officials and people were excited and busy for her return. He himself had also come to Chang'an. Then, he inexplicably began to visit brothels, and was the first to hear the songs specially arranged to welcome her back. Thinking of this, he couldn't help but laugh. "What's so funny?" The young maidservant frowned and rebuked. Ning Ke spread his hands to show that he had no opinion. He just wanted to find out more about those things, and did not want to waste this rare opportunity to visit a brothel by arguing with this little maidservant. Knowing how important the House of Red Sleeves was to the officials and nobles, he had a vague feeling that the censor Zhang Ichi's place of pleasure should be here, because this was the only place that had enough privacy and level. How should he probe? It was not appropriate to pretend to be stupid or naive, so he began to talk about some interesting things that happened in the border town. He believed that these stories with the flavor of rough wind and sand would be very attractive to the little maidservant beside him, who lived in a pile of women all day but had heard many legends of the frontier fortress soldiers. Ning Ke had always been very good at dealing with maidservants. This had nothing to do with the princess who was far away in the palace. It was because he had a little maidservant who did not like to smile and was the coldest. Even Sang Sang, the best cold-faced maidservant in the world, was subdued by him. Of course, this was only his self-perception and might not be the truth. It was even easier to deal with this little maidservant of Mistress Jian. Sure enough, after walking a few steps along the stream, the little maidservant beamed with joy and excitedly began to exchange gossip about their respective industries with Ning Quebec. Ning Ke understood why the song and dance troupe had to do erotic work. He also knew who was the most popular among the beautiful girls in the backyard, who had been bought over, and who had the highest official position in the imperial court to serve the lord. The more beautiful girls there were, the easier it was to earn money with their beauty. This was because it was a very easy method and the ratio of investment and output was really amazing. It should be known that the top courtesans of the House of Red Sleeves would become the concubines of high-ranking officials in various countries. Who wouldn't want to earn enough money and finally have a good husband? When Mistress Jian founded the House of Red Sleeves, she also wanted to be a clean singing and dancing troupe. However, in order to survive in a world dominated by men, how could a seemingly well-respected singing and dancing troupe resist the pressure from the nobles and even the royal family? In the end, she could only succumb to reality and even began to cater to it. The flowering trees by the stream were blooming and the starlight was broken into countless pieces in the flowing water. The world behind the white wall looked so clean and graceful. Ning Ke walked under the starlight with his hands clasped behind his back like a poet. However, looking at such a clean scene, he did not feel too relaxed. A young lad should not have troubles. Ning Ke thought for a while about the gossip that the little maidservant had said and shook his head to get rid of the emotions in his mind into the stream. He wandered along the stream and occasionally met a beautiful girl walking on the stone path. He would slightly step aside to give way to her politely, which was very elegant. As mentioned before, when a 15 or 16-year-old young scholar has to pretend to be calm and steady, it will always make people feel that it is a little funny. Fortunately, ugly people are funny and annoying, but if funny and immature are added to it, it will become cute. After entering Chang'an, it was much more convenient to take a bath than in the city of Wei. His slightly curly black hair, which was dirty and greasy when he was at the frontier fortress, had long been washed clean and refreshed by Song Song's small hands. Coupled with his not exactly handsome but clean and clear eyebrows, he naturally looked refreshing. In particular, the hot and sour noodles sold by the stall at the end of Lin 40th Street were really delicious, and a few thin slices of beef in the soup was even more delicious. These days, he and Sang Sang had been eating this kind of food, and they had actually put on some weight. Now he looked cute and harmless and very likable. Those girls who were politely given way to looked back at him curiously. Seeing that he was young and clean, they liked him a little. When someone found out that he was the lad in the radical brothel, they could not help but cover their mouths and laugh. The girls had seen many strange stories in the brothel, but it was the first time that Mistress Jian had ordered someone to take a lad to a brothel. They were so curious and excited that they surrounded Ning Ke and refused to let him go. The little maidservant was squeezed out of the group of girls and looked inside angrily. Her heart was full of frustration, as if her exclusive toy had been taken away by the big sisters. She angrily put her hands on her waist and shouted at Mistress Jian, "Don't harm the child. This lad is a scholar who is going to take the academy exam, and he is, well, are you guys willing to give him a big red packet? Get out of my way. Hey, look at our Xiao Xiao, you are so anxious. We just want to borrow this lad to play. Why are you so anxious? Oh, he is actually going to take the exam for the great scholar of the academy. We have to take a good look at him." The Zhu clan's maidens parted the crowd, allowing a dazzling beauty to walk over. This woman seemed to be in her 20s, and her figure was extremely voluptuous. The arms and waist that were exposed from her dress were as smooth as pearls and as smooth as jade. As she walked, she seemed to be able to cause the wind to blow, as if water could flow out of her body. However, she had a small face that covered all the fat on her body. There was no sign of her being plump or charming at all. Instead, she had a very delicate and pretty aura. Seeing this girl, Ning Ke's eyes suddenly lit up, and he silently shouted in his heart, "It's her!" Chapter 42. In the eyes of Miss Zhu and the maidservant named Xiao Qiao, Ning Ke's current look was that he had been bewitched by the plump girl and had become a dumb goose that could not walk. The maidservant was even more displeased. She stared at the plump but delicate girl and said, "Dewdrop, this is what great-grandmother told you to do. Do you dare to disobey?" Dewdrop was the most popular girl in the House of Red Sleeve. Although she did not participate in the courtesan bell competition for 2 consecutive years, she had always been popular because of her delicate face and fair skin. But even she did not dare to disobey Mistress Jian's order. She rolled her eyes and went forward to hold Ning Ke's hand with a smile. she said, since it is a rule set by great-grandmother, I dare not disobey. It's just that I like this kid the moment I see him. I like the shy look of a kid the most. Come, follow me to the yard to play for a while. Ning Ke naturally did not object. He allowed her to hold his hand and walked along the stream to a small yard among the flowers and trees. Behind him, Miss Zhu only teased them in a low voice and did not stop them. Only the maidservant Xiao Chao shouted, "Great-grandmother said that no one is allowed to do business with him." Is that true? Ning Ke was shocked and looked back. He thought to himself that with Mistress Jian's status in the world of brothels, if her words were to spread, all the brothels in Chang'an would not do business with him in the future. How could he do that? The maidservant Xiao Chao looked at him proudly and said, "Didn't great-grandmother mean that?" Ning Ke was speechless. No wonder the history books said that the emperor was not scary. Eunuchs who were used to passing fake edicts were the most annoying. Thinking of such a prospect, he could not help but cry in his heart. He felt endless sorrow and vicissitudes of life. But even so, he still had to follow the popular girl called Dewdrop. After entering the small courtyard, nothing happened. Dewdrop sat cross-legged on the couch and ordered the maidservant to serve various fruits to Ning Quebec. She, on the other hand, leaned against the railing and ate melon seed. She asked Ning Ke about his meeting with Mistress Jian and the situation at the frontier fortress. Ning Ke had always been good at it. The taverns in the city of Wei and the casinos in the military camp were all good battlefields for him to practice his eloquence and observation skills. Tonight, he first faced Mistress Jian, then the little maidservant, and now he was facing the most popular prostitute in Chang'an City. He was not afraid at all. He ate fruits and chatted naturally, as if he was at his own home. Dewdrop did not notice that the topic had changed from the city of Wei to the city of Chang'an, and after she had eaten half a plate of melon seeds. The topic had also changed from whether the barbarian girl was beautiful to what kind of people the guests of the House of Red Sleeves were, who was the most jealous, and whose wife was the most jealous. It seemed to violate professional ethics to talk about the client's privacy. But to be honest, this was indeed one of the few extracurricular activities that the girls in the brothel enjoyed apart from music, chess, calligraphy, painting, and dancing. Dewdrop didn't find it strange at all. Instead, she talked more and more enthusiastically. Ning Ke lowered his head and picked fruits on the plate. He looked like he didn't care and was just casually asking and listening. But in fact, his ears had already pricked up and kept filtering the names that entered his ears. Suddenly, his fingers slightly stiffened. I've never seen such a henpecked man. He's a rank 4 or 5 official, but he has to disguise himself every time he comes to the brothel. And that guy is useless. He's only good at talking. No wonder he's the imperial censor with an iron mouth. The evaluation of the imperial censor with an iron mouth was actually used harshly by the girls in the brothel. Ning Ke thought of the satisfied expressions of Zhang Yiqi's concubines at the entrance of the Zhang mansion. Suddenly, an image of a white-haired imperial censor lying between the concubine's legs appeared in his mind. He almost spat out the fruit in his mouth and coughed continuously. Dewdrop felt that her evaluation was inappropriate the moment she said it. She had hoped that the lad wouldn't understand the hidden meaning in her words, but she didn't expect his reaction to be so exaggerated. She then understood what was going on and couldn't help feeling a little embarrassed. She pretended to be angry and punched his shoulder. She blushed and said angrily, "What do you guys do in the border town all day? How can a kid like you know these things?" After joking for a while, the maidservant walked over and whispered something in Dewdrop's ear. Ning Ke looked out of the courtyard and knew that it was getting late. It was time to leave. He then stood up and bowed sincerely to bid farewell. Dewdrop pursed her lips and thought for a while. She took out a silver ingot from the box beside the pillow and handed it over. She said with a smile, "This isn't a big red packet. But you shouldn't waste your time chatting with me. Don't look down on me. I don't know why, but I feel very happy talking to you. Ning Ke thought that it was natural. You had to pay attention to the way you talked to the guests. You couldn't be like me, who was lying on the couch like a village ant and had to swear every few sentences. However, he also liked Dewdrop's straightforward way of talking, as well as her beautiful face and plump body. So he didn't act pretentiously and took the silver ingot and said, "Just take it as a gift from my sister." Hearing this, Dewdrop's eyes brightened. She went forward and held him in her arms. She rubbed his head and said happily, "Although I don't know why I want to look after you, you can come and see me when you are free." She was engaged in the brothel business, while Ning Ke was a young scholar. They could sit and talk to each other in the courtyard of the brothel. If they were somewhere else, they would be people from two different worlds. She was naturally happy to be called sister by Ning Ke, but she didn't acknowledge him as her younger brother. Chong and women, even a prostitute, had her own bearing and pride. When they returned to the shop on Lin 47th Street, Sang Sang casually mentioned that two people would come to ask if the boss was in. Ning Ke didn't care and asked Sang Sang to boil a pot of hot water to warm her feet before he went to bed. The lights went out and the room was dark. As usual, Ning Ke hugged the pair of small feet, but his mind was recalling what he saw and heard at the House of Red Sleeves tonight. He first thought about the censor Zhang Yiqi, then more of Dewdrop's pink face appeared in his mind, as well as her soft and supple body. Especially when she hugged him and rubbed his head, the soft and supple touch and the orchid-like fragrance on his face seemed to still be there. Thinking of Si Jing, he felt a little hot at this moment. Hugging Song Song's small feet, he felt even hotter. When his knees touched the part that was thin now but would become plump in the future, he felt even hotter under the quilt. People had to grow up eventually. It wasn't a good idea to continue like this. Ning Ke lifted the quilt and sat up. Looking at the girl who was woken up, he smiled and said, "Chong and gets hotter earlier than the border town. It seems like we have to sleep in separate beds in advance." Little Sang Sang rubbed her eyes and said in a daze, "But there's no Kong bed here. I feel colder than home." Chapter 43. In order to find out when Censor Zhang Yiqi would go to the brothel, the route he would take after entering the brothel, and the time he would leave, Ning Ke would inevitably visit the brothel named House of Red Sleeves. However, he could not let others know that he was concerned about these things, in case they would investigate him. Therefore, he spent most of his time in the brothel fooling around. He became more and more familiar with the plump girl named Dewdrop. Even the other girls and manservants in the brothel were used to this poor lad's visits. Since he was a scholar that Mistress Jian cared about, no one dared to say anything. Although Ning Ke could only pretend to be intimate with the girls and not do anything because Xiao Chao had passed on Mistress Jian's rules, he naturally did not need to spend the night with them. However, no matter how thick-skinned a person was, he would still tip the manservants and maidservants some copper coins after entering the brothel. Therefore, after a few times, the rapidly decreasing silver coins in the brothel finally attracted Song Song's attention. When he came back that night, Ning Ke did not hide anything from the little handmaiden. He simply told her what he had done in the past few days and said, "I have to become a regular customer. In the future, if anything happens in that building, the government will not suspect me. Otherwise, if I go there once and the censor coincidentally dies, this coincidence is enough to make the Chong and local government suspicious." Then, he smiled and continued, "After this matter is settled, I naturally do not need to go to the brothel to waste time. I will not spend more money. Why do I feel that young master's heart is full of reluctance to leave?" Sang Sang looked up at him and seriously suggested, "But if you don't go to the brothel after the censor dies, won't it arouse suspicion?" Ning Ke was startled and then realized that there was indeed some problem. Instead of being annoyed, he felt a little relieved. He rubbed her head and said, "If this is really the case, then I really have to go a few more times after this. Check how much silver coins you have left. Sang Sang agreed and was ready to do her favorite job of counting silver coins. Ning Ke suddenly thought of something and hurriedly called out to her. He took out a box of cosmetic powder from his bosom and handed it to her after a moment of hesitation. This is a gift from Dewdrop from the brothel. She is a nice person. In fact, he was the one who begged Dewdrop for this box of cosmetic powder. His purpose was to make Sang Sang happy. As for adding the word nice, it was because he was worried that Sang Sang would despise the status of the ladies in the building and feel that the cosmetic powder was dirty. Sang Sang took the powder box, her tanned face full of joy. Her willow eyes, which had been stretched even thinner, were full of smiles. She said, "I've long heard that the girls in those brothels have their own secret recipes, some of which are even better than those in Chinjinji Cosmetic Store. Do you like it?" Ning Ke looked at her with a smile. Sang Sang hugged the box tightly with her arms and looked up at him. She pursed her lips and refused to answer him, but her face was already beaming with joy. She hid the box together with the cosmetic powder box from Chinjinji Cosmetics Store that she bought a few days ago. She served Ning Ke's feet with a pot of boiling water and washed her own feet with the rest of the warm water. Sang Sang spread out the 2 blankets, took off her coat and quickly crawled into the bed. She muttered that it was too cold without a Kong bed. As the night deepened, the faint sound of the night watchman could be heard from outside the shop. Sang Sang had not fallen asleep. She stared at the ceiling with her slender eyes that shone like black gems. She suddenly asked, "Young master, that censor, when will he go to the brothel?" Ning Ke was silent for a long time before he answered softly, "Tomorrow." Sang Sang did not know that Chang'an was a hunting ground that was more dangerous than Min Mountain and grassland. Therefore, she was not worried about her young master's safety. Instead, she was worried about something else. She grabbed the edge of the blanket with both hands and looked down at the other side of the bed. She said seriously, "Young master, since that censor is going to die tomorrow, you have to tell him why before he dies, right?" "Yes." Ning Ke looked at the ceiling and frowned. He said, "This kind of thing like revenge. The censor doesn't even know what I'm avenging. It does not feel right." "Then tell him. Because of some things, I have to destroy you on behalf of Haotian? Isn't it a little casual and not dignified to say it so bluntly? Are there any more solemn or stylish routines?" Sang Sang frowned and thought hard about how to solve this problem. After a long time, she nodded hard on the pillow and said, "Young master, write a poem." "Poem? I'm not good at this." "Then I'll write one." "Okay." Sang Sang read a few lines of the poem that she made up on the spot. Ning Ke listened carefully and thought about it. Finally, he said seriously, "This poem is better than mine." The imperial censor of the Tang Empire was in charge of inspecting officials and impeaching lawbreakers. His rank was not high, but he had a lot of power. Anyone would be satisfied with such a noble position. However, Zhang Yiqi was never satisfied. He had been a supervising censor with a bright future 13 years ago. But after so long, he was still a noble and useless censor. But he did not dare to complain, because he knew very well the real reason for his stagnation. After participating in the case of Xianwei General Lin Guangyuan, his speed of promotion slowed down. 7 years ago, after the massacre of a village in the Yan territory, he was promoted from the secretary of the censor to the imperial censor. Since then, he had not been promoted any further. Working for His Highness the Prince and Great General Xiahou as a reward should not have ended up like this. If the 2 important figures did not want their secret to be known, then they should have done everything they could to kill him instead of leaving him hanging in the censorate. Were they not afraid that Zhang Yiqi would hold a grudge against them and expose the matter? For his stagnant future, Zhang Yiqi thought hard for 2 years. 4 years ago, he finally came to a realization, and then he felt cold all over. There was only one person in the entire Great Tang who could cause an imperial censor who was in the limelight to fall into depravity, who could easily sever the path that His Highness the Prince and Marquis Xia had laid out for him without anyone noticing that he had used the slightest bit of strength. That was the Emperor. In the eyes of the world, the Emperor of the Tang Empire was not stupid, but compared to his ancestors, he was a bit conservative and cowardly. It sounded ridiculous, but the most convincing evidence that led the world to come to this conclusion was that ever since His Majesty the Emperor took the throne, the empire was no longer as rude and unreasonable in its dealings with other countries. Instead, it began to be reasonable. Although the Tang Empire was still in the hands of reason, a reasonable bandit would always look cute in the eyes of hostages and fat sheep. But Zhang Yiqi and most of the court officials knew very well that their emperor was not a conservative and cowardly person. His Majesty was fond of literature and calligraphy since he was young. Under the golden dragon robe, he hid a bit of scholarly spirit. Therefore, he was a bit tolerant and lazy. But His Majesty's surname was Li, and the blood of the Tang imperial family flowed in his body. If someone touched his bottom line, he would definitely see the real wrath of the emperor. In the two cases of Xianwei general's treason and the village massacre in the Yan territory, all the doubtful points had been erased. There was no witness or material evidence left. But His Majesty did not necessarily believe in the investigation of the court officials. It was just that there was no evidence. Even if he was on the dragon throne, he would probably be too lazy to reverse the verdict. But those officials who aroused his suspicion would never have a future in this life. The prince was the emperor's favorite younger brother, and Xiahou was the emperor's favorite general. Therefore, His Majesty could temporarily tolerate them. But Zhang Yiqi was just a censor, so what? Chapter 44. After figuring this out, Zhang Yiqi was so depressed that he gave up the idea of currying favor in the officialdom. Instead, he devoted himself to worldly pleasures. He forced himself to marry several concubines despite his fierce wife at home. Every once in a while, he would go to the famous brothel in Chang'an city to hang out. However, to lead a befuddled life, one still needed the support of money and official positions. Zhang Yiqi did not want to be caught red-handed. A censor visiting a prostitute could be a big or small matter, but if such a thing happened to him, His Majesty the Emperor in the palace would definitely mercilessly demote him to the mortal world and then ruthlessly step on him 3 times. For this reason, the censor was extremely careful every time he went out to have fun, as if he was a thief. It was no exaggeration to say that Zhang Yiqi was definitely the most careful person among all the officials in Chang'an who went in and out of the brothel. He was also the one who was the most difficult to track down. It was precisely because of this reason that Zhu'er had never been able to track down his whereabouts. Ning Ke had also spent several days and his last dozens of taels of silver. A horse carriage stopped outside the side door of the House of Red Sleeves. Censor Zhang Yiqi, who was disguised as an ordinary rich man, got off the carriage and walked in. He waved his hand behind him, and several bodyguards, who were already familiar with him, went to find a restaurant in the alley and waited. After Zhang Yiqi entered the door, he signaled for the manservant to leave. He walked along a stone path, hidden by the green bamboos of the courtyard wall towards a certain courtyard by the stream. Once inside, the iron-shouldered censor had officially transformed into an old brothel customer. The worried expression on his face finally disappeared and was replaced by a rare look of comfort and contentment. He was already familiar with the path and naturally did not need anyone to lead the way. He was also afraid of being seen by others. The back of the House of Red Sleeves was an independent and secluded courtyard. Moreover, he would make an appointment before coming here, so he did not have to worry about embarrassing things like bumping into each other. As for safety, he was not worried at all. The security in Chang'an had always been excellent. Other than those boorish men who cut their sleeves and cut their hands to fight, there were rarely any murders in the north, south, and west cities. As for the House of Red Sleeves, no one dared to cause trouble. Everyone knew that the owner of the House of Red Sleeves was backed by the Chang and local government. Mistress Jian's backer was the Empress, who was standing on the top of the mountain. Although the fourth princess had returned from the grassland, no one dared to provoke Mistress Jian other than her. Mistress Jian was really amazing. She was forced to come from the South Jin Kingdom by the former emperor and establish the reputation of the House of Red Sleeves as the best song and dance troupe in the world. Over the years, she had also trained countless courtesans and won most of the glory of the brothels. What Zhang Yiqi admired the most was that such a madam could enter and exit the palace freely. It was even rumored that she and the Empress even called each other sisters in private. Zhang Yiqi looked at the small courtyard that was getting closer and closer, but his mind was thinking about the legend of Mistress Jian. He thought to himself that if someone could win the favor of that woman, then his career would be smooth sailing. In fact, if it weren't for the fact that he couldn't afford to lose face, he would have already pounced on her. The censor did not know that a few days ago, a young man who had just arrived in Chang and had somehow caught Mistress Jian's eye. Although he could not say that he was favored or appreciated by her, he would have already pounced on her. What he did not expect was that the young man was leaning against a railing on the third floor and looking at his back with a faint smile. He had made a rough plan for the whole thing and should not be a burden to Dewdrop. However, to be safe, Ning Ke arrived at the House of Red Sleeves in the afternoon. He did not go to Dewdrop's courtyard like he did a few days ago. Instead, he went straight to the main building to chat with the maidservant, Xiao Chao. This made Xiao Chao very surprised. She laughed at him with a hint of shyness and joy. Ning Ke had noticed Zhang Yiqi the moment he walked in from the side door. He had been on duty with the censor for a few days. How could he not remember Zhang Yiqi's back? He leaned against the railing and smiled as he watched the figure disappear into the bamboo. He did not do anything. In order not to implicate Dewdrop, he did not even go to the courtyard today. Naturally, he would not choose to do it in the courtyard. "I'll let you enjoy your luck with women for the last time." Ning Ke looked at his target's back and suddenly remembered what Dewdrop said that night. He thought of the old censor's dirty look later, and could not help but shiver. He muttered to himself, "Is this your last chance to serve the girl?" Xiao Chao, the maidservant, had a lot of things to do for Mistress Jian. She took the box of candied plums from Ning Ke and left with a sweet smile. Ning Ke smiled and continued to stand by the railing, looking at the sunset, the bamboo and the white walls. Calculating that it was about time, he found the back staircase with familiarity. Using the shadow of the building, he went around to the side door and saw the marked carriage. He casually walked over and pressed his palm on the shaft of the carriage. The horse in front of the shaft looked back at him in confusion and snorted. Ning Ke had lived in the city of Wei for many years and often plundered in the grassland. He was very good at dealing with horses and sheep. He casually patted the horses and the confused horse immediately became obedient. It comfortably kicked the ground with its hooves. A guard of the restaurant in the side alley subconsciously looked in that direction and found no one. He lowered his head and continued to eat the leftover food on the plate. There was a wooden tub for bathing in every courtyard. However, Zhang Yiqi would always go to the sauna room by the side door every time he finished his business because he felt inferior. He felt that he could recover some strength by scrubbing his back. He also felt safe in a private room, and it was convenient to get on the horse carriage when he went out. It was the same today. The censor casually washed his body and only wore a pair of silk underpants. He lay on the short bed covered with cotton cloth and waited for the woman who was used to scrubbing his back. Back scrubbing required salt, milk and wood oil, so it took some time to prepare. He was already mentally prepared. However, when he was waiting, he could not help but recall the erotic scene in the courtyard. Thinking of Dewdrop's good skin and flesh, he started to feel hot all over again. However, There was a look of resentment on his face. Today, Dewdrop rejected his request to serve him alone again. Zhang Ichi was in a bad mood and said in a low voice, "You're just a stinky whore who can be ridden by thousands of men. What are you so proud of? I've spent so much money on you and you're still making excuses. You're so unreasonable. You think I'm a lowly official? Women are so ignorant. I'm a 6th-ranked censor. If I were placed in any department, I would at least be a 4th-ranked official. No, a 3rd-ranked official." At this moment the door was pushed open with a squeak. Footsteps could be heard approaching the bed. Zhang Ichi stopped cursing and closed his eyes to enjoy it. When the hot towel was applied to his back, he could not help but moan in pleasure. However, he could not moan anymore, because another hot towel was stuffed directly into his mouth. Following that, he felt pain in his limbs and was tightly tied to the short bed. Chapter 45. Zhang Ichi struggled with all his might. Wearing only a pair of silk pants, he squirmed like a disgusting worm on the short bed. His mouth was gagged with a towel, and he made muffled cries for help from time to time. The towel tied his hands and feet to the short bed was tied with a strange knot. The wild boars in Min Mountain could not break free even if they struggled for a whole night. Moreover, Zhang Ichi was old and his body was not as strong as before. Moreover, he had been wasted by alcohol and women these years. His so-called struggle was futile and comical. The muffled cries for help were not louder than the buzzing of mosquitoes. Zhang Ichi immediately realized this in despair. After all, he was a Tang official who dared to ignore hundreds of ghosts. At this critical moment, he forced himself to calm down and stop struggling. Instead, he listened to the sounds around him. There was someone in the room, and it was obvious that the person did not want to hide. The sound of steady and clear footsteps came from behind Zhang Ichi, gradually approaching, and was about to reach him. Zhang Ichi wanted to see who dared to act so recklessly, but he suddenly thought of something. His body stiffened, and under the pressure of fear, he used all his strength and closed his eyes tightly. A murderer who dared to tie up a guest in the House of Red Sleeves must be very brave and ruthless. If he found out that he had seen his face, how could he survive? Yes, he was indeed an imperial censor. But in the history of the Tang Empire, many officials died in the hands of boorish men. This is not as fun as I thought. I thought that after your mouth was gagged, you would mutter that you didn't like it. Then, I could use this thing in my hand to make you feel pain and pleasure. I didn't expect you to be so obedient so quickly. All right, open your eyes. The voice was clear and calm with a hint of sarcasm. It did not sound like a murderer at all, but more like a young man joking with someone in a workshop in Chang'an. Zhang Ichi thought that he could not be fooled. He closed his eyes tightly and even felt a pain between his eyebrows. He refused to open his eyes, but in his heart, he kept guessing who this young man was and why he wanted to deal with him. Open your eyes, or I will really burst your chrysanthemum with this thing in my hand. The young man's voice was calm, but it seemed that he would do what he said. Zhang Ichi no longer dared to guess what the other party was thinking. He opened his eyes in trepidation and looked forward in horror. She saw a youth half squatting in front of the short bed, looking at her with a smile from less than half a step away, as if he had met an old friend in a foreign land. In his hand, he was holding a table leg that was 2 feet long. At this moment, with such an expression and such concentration, he could not help but look a little crazy. Ning Ke looked at the censor's flushed face seriously and smiled gently. I will remove the towel from your mouth, but please control your volume. If your volume is too loud, I will have to kill you immediately. I know there are many officials in the Tang Empire who are not afraid of death, but you are definitely not one of them. But in Zhang Ichi's eyes, this childish face, this gentle smile, exuded the coldest feeling. The other party did not mask his face and was not worried about being seen by him. In fact, he even wanted him to see it. Then, there were only two possibilities. The young man had a powerful background and was not worried about the anger of a censor after being humiliated. Or, he wanted to kill him. Do we have a feud? Zhang Ichi forcefully suppressed the fear in his heart and asked. He quickly thought of his political enemies and the descendants of the officials who had been punished. But he sadly found that he had been suppressed by His Majesty in the imperial court for the past few years and had no right to offend anyone. How could there be descendants of the officials who had been punished? In a normal story, many Avengers would say at this time, "I have no feud with you. I am just doing this for the sake of the people in the world, so I have to act on behalf of Haotian and punish all the treacherous officials." But unfortunately, Ning Ke regretfully shook his head and said, "We really have a feud. So I am not a hero, nor a handsome young warrior. I am just a petty person who holds a grudge." "How old are you? What feud can we have?" Zhang Ichi asked with a trembling voice. Ning Ke coughed twice and then began to recite slowly in the most affectionate tone and the most energetic tone, "I come from the mountains and rivers to take your life. I come from the river to take your life. I come from the grassland to take your life. I come from the uninhabited small village in the Yen territory to take your life. I come from the uninhabited general's mansion in Chang'an City to take your life." Upon hearing the uninhabited village in the Yen territory and the uninhabited general's mansion in Chang'an City, Zhang Ichi's vision went black and he almost fainted. He finally knew what feud he had with the lad in front of him, but it was too late. If continuous praise could stop the other party from taking revenge, he would definitely not mind praising this pile of **t as the most perfect poem in the Tianqi era of the Tang Empire. But he knew it was impossible. Whether it was the massacre of the village or the extermination of the Xianwei general's family, it was an irreconcilable feud in the world. Zhang Ichi's eyes were bleak and desperate as he looked at the lad in front of him. He did not expect to survive today, but he still wanted to buy some time. He said with a sad face, "I was ordered by someone, He was prepared to shout for help. He believed that the lad would not be able to react in time if his desperate plea turned into a scream. As long as he shouted for help, both his guards and the thugs from the brothel would definitely react. By then, the lad would have to die with him. Maybe, the lad would even forget to kill him in his panic. This plan seemed perfect, but the censor who had lived in Chang'an for a long time did not know how vigilant the hunters in Min Mountain would be towards their seemingly dead prey before they cut off their meat and skin. Just as he was about to inhale, Ning Ke's palm had already pierced through the hole in the short bed when the airflow in his lungs was still far away from his vocal cords. The steel-like palm stabbed into Zhang Ichi's throat. His skin did not show any signs of damage, but the cartilage inside was already cracked. Ning Ke stood up and took out a random iron nail and aimed it at the back of the censor's head. He used the rusty but still sharp nail to measure the center of the censor's head. Then, he held the table leg with his right hand and smashed it down. There was a soft muffled sound, like the sound of a grassland barbarian's sharp machete piercing through a leather bag filled with wine. The rusty iron nail pierced through Zhang Ichi's skull and pierced deeply into it until it disappeared. Ning Ke quickly placed a snow-white towel on the back of the censor's head and aimed at the spot where the rusty nail had pierced into the skull. He pressed down on the towel with both hands and stood on his tiptoes. He used all his strength, and because he used too much strength, the short bed began to creak as if it was about to fall apart. Chapter 46. After a while, Ning Ke stopped pressing down. He removed the towel and carefully examined the back of Zhang Ichi's head. He used his fingers to push aside the hair and found that the wound where the nail had entered the skull had shrunk to a very small extent. The tiny blood spots had also solidified. If the coroner did not deliberately look for it with a light source, it would be extremely difficult to find. He looked down at the towel in his hand and found that there was a blood stain the size of a copper coin in the middle of the snow-white towel. It had turned black and looked like a rotten winter sweet. Strangely, Zhang Yiqi did not die immediately. Instead, he struggled and convulsed on the short bed in pain. He wanted to howl in pain, but his voice was hoarse and weak. His eyeballs kept rolling upwards, revealing most of the white of his eyes. It was a horrifying sight. He felt a sharp pain at the back of his head and thought that Ning Ke had hit him with a stick. He did not know what was actually happening. If he knew that there was a nail in his head, he would probably be scared to death. Since you are ordered to do so, you should be prepared to die for others. But, if you can run to your own carriage, perhaps I can spare your life. After saying this, Ning Ke untied the towel tied around his limbs and threw it into the bucket beside him. Then, he disappeared into the approaching night. When a person was on the brink of death, any words he heard would be like the last straw in the raging yellow river. He would subconsciously do as the person said. Moreover, the censor was in so much pain that he could not think clearly. Even if he still had a little bit of rationality left in him, it would only be an instinctive reaction. Regardless of whether the cruel young man would let him go or not, he would definitely run to his own carriage to be safe. Ning Ke stood in the shadow of the bamboo, not far from the side door, and looked over. He realized that it was later than expected and could not help but frown. Just as he was worrying, he saw the censor, Zhang Yiqi, stumbling out of the side door. He should have been naked, but he did not know when he had put on more clothes. His body trembled violently and his eyes were unfocused. He tried his best to open his mouth to shout, but no words came out. He looked like a drunkard, but more like a fish that was about to die of thirst. Outside the side door, the attendant beside the carriage had an anxious look on his face. He did not notice anything strange at all and shouted, "Master, I heard that Madame has been confirmed and knows that you are here. She will bring those women here to make trouble. Let's go quickly." Zhang Yiqi rushed over, his footsteps unsteady. Just as he was about to reach the carriage, he couldn't hold on for the last few steps and directly fell to the ground. He reached out his trembling hand in despair, wanting to grab the clothes of the attendant. The eyebrows on his ashen face twitched, extremely distorted and ugly. Perhaps it was this frightening expression that scared the horse out of its wits. With a loud crash, the carriage collapsed. The trunk of the carriage broke apart like building blocks, and like a small mountain, Zhang Yiqi was directly crushed under it. As the dust settled, the few attendants and guards stood beside the broken carriage like fools. They looked at their master, whose face was bleeding profusely. It was obvious that he was no longer breathing. They did not understand what had happened. "Yes, we know that Madame is indeed ferocious. Master, you have drunk a lot of wine today, which magnified your fear. When you heard our shouts, you panicked and ran a little faster. But you, how could you just crash into the carriage? And how could this carriage be so fragile that it collapsed with just one crash?" The commotion at the side door had already alerted the hatchet men and stewards of the House of Red Sleeves. They surrounded the carriage with a pale face. They ignored the inarticulate explanation of the attendants and guards who were still panic-stricken. They directly restrained everyone present and sent someone to inform the Chang and local government. The onlookers did not know who the fat old man who was crushed to death by the carriage was. They only thought that he was an unlucky and pitiful whoremaster. They all pointed at him and talked about him. However, how could the people of the House of Red Sleeves not know his identity? A censor just died in front of their own brothel. How could they explain it? The censor, Zhang Yiqi, became the first official in the history of the Tang Empire to board a carriage in a panic because he was afraid of his ferocious wife. Unfortunately, the horse was spooked and died under the carriage. As the censor ran for the last time in his life, the real culprit, Ning Ke, stood in the shadows and clenched his fists. He was silently cheering for the censor in his heart. Using a sharp blade to pierce through the cerebellum would give him a very short buffer time. He had tried it many times when he was learning how to kill a bison from the barbarian swordsman in the grassland. However, this was the first time he used it on a human. He did not know how long the censor, who was extremely weak, could last. It was a small gamble. It was not a problem for him if the horse spooked the carriage. Indeed, we should not underestimate the strong willpower of the officials who are afraid of death. Looking at the censor who had finally managed to run to the side of the horse carriage and was buried under a large pile of tattered wooden cloth, Ning Ke sighed silently. He quickly turned around and left, wiping the sweat off his forehead with the white towel in his hand. This was the first time he killed someone in Chang'an City. It was inevitable that he was a little nervous. However, at this moment, he was thinking more about the fact that Zhang Yiqi was wearing a coat when he ran out. At such a critical moment, the censor still did not want anyone to see his naked body. He was very concerned about his reputation. He was indeed a model of morality and a beast in human clothing. At this time, the stewards in the front and backyard of the House of Red Sleeves had already received the news. Many pairs of eyes were trying to find out if there was anything suspicious. Of course, Ning Ke would not choose to leave at this time. He went along the stream to the courtyard of another girl he was familiar with and chatted with her, who had recently come to visit relatives for a few days. The girl was very happy to see him, probably because she was bored. Ning Ke was also very happy. He talked with her with a face full of smiles and occasionally wiped his lips with the white towel in his hand that had dark plum blossoms hidden inside. The night shrouded the Lin 47th Street. On the bed in the backyard of the old brush pen shop, the master and the servant were talking about what had happened. The basin beside the bed was filled with the burned towel. Sang Sang wrapped the quilt tightly on the other side of the bed. She asked curiously, "If this is called forging a crime scene, why didn't they just forge it into the wind on horseback?" Ning Ke asked in surprise, "Do you know what wind on horseback is?" "No. I've heard you tell me stories when I was a child." "I've told you such stories? Well, maybe I've forgotten." If the censor got wind on horseback in the brothel, how could that madam not continue to make trouble? How could the imperial court not investigate? Once the real experts in the Ministry of Penalty are alerted, I don't have much confidence. Therefore, our most important goal is to let the Chang'an local government believe that this is a traffic accident. Only a traffic accident will not alert the imperial court. But more importantly, this conclusion is the easiest for the Chang'an local government to force the censor to shut up. Sang Sang was quiet for a long time. Then she said in a low and shy voice, "It's very complicated. I don't quite understand." "Young master, you really think about many things." "So you always don't think about things?" Ning Ke used Mistress Jian's method to deal with him. He said resentfully, "If you don't think about things, you will become more and more stupid." Sang Sang answered frankly, "She's a girl. It's normal for her to be a little stupid. Don't people say that stupid girls are stupid girls?" Ning Ke was speechless. After a moment of silence, he asked with concern, "Are you tired of sending letters today? Did anyone in the Zhang's mansion see you?" "I'm fine," Sang Sang answered. Chapter 47. In the dead of night, Ning Ke lay on the bed and stared at the ceiling. He naturally thought that if Darky was still alive, Sang Sang would not have to take the risk to send a message to the Zhang mansion. There was not much to conclude about today's assassination. After so many days of preparation, it was easy to kill an unguarded old civil official. When the rusty nail pierced into Zhang Yiqi's skull, he was already dead. There was no way he would leave anything that could harm Ningquebec. The other methods were just additional actions. As he explained to Sang Sang, the imperial court expected the censor to die in a traffic accident rather than in a prostitute's bed. As for the feeling of killing someone, he did not feel much. His life in the Tang Empire began with a murder and grew up in countless murders. He had killed many people, and used many more methods to kill people, many of which were more cruel and bloody than today's. Would he feel fear, nausea, and even fear of the dark after killing someone? This kind of situation could only happen to those scholars who immerse themselves in poetry. As for him, although he would also participate in the Academy entrance exam of the Academy, he was not a scholar. He was a hunter who killed old hunters, a horse gang who killed young horse gangs, and a natural killer. But the person he killed today was after all a high-ranking official of the Tang Empire. He was the target of revenge that he had accumulated for many years. The blood that flowed in the general's mansion when he was 4 flashed across the ceiling, the old housekeeper and the little guy's shocked and lifeless eyes. Ning Ke laughed happily, feeling that the stuffiness in his chest had finally dissipated a little. On the other side of the bed, Song Song's little face was also full of smiles. She knew that he must be in a particularly good mood today, so she decided to wait until he killed all his enemies, including General Xiaoho, before she took out the box she hid under the bed and showed it to him. She believed that when he saw that piece of paper again, his feelings would definitely be different from now. The box contained some papers that Ning Ke had casually thrown away over the years, but they were very good in Song Song's eyes. The latest one was the funeral note that Ning Ke had written on the night of Zhua Er's death. Ning Ke thought that the paper had been thrown away with the trash, but he did not expect that his little handmaiden had secretly hidden it. After a long period of silence, Ning Ke suddenly sighed and said with some regret, "I didn't think there was anything wrong with the poem you wrote last night. But when I read it in front of that guy today, I felt that something was wrong. Well, after thinking about it carefully, I felt that it was a little silly." Of course, he was referring to the poem, "Where Do I Come From, to Take Your Life?" The monotonous repetition, the deliberate intensification, the clumsy words were even worse than a limerick. However, the master and the servant were obviously lacking in literary talent. On the night when they came up with their revenge plan, they actually thought it was pretty good. "Then I'll make some changes," Sang Sang replied seriously. "Young master, when do you plan to kill the second person? Tell me the time, and I promise I'll fix it before that day." Finished editing before the deadline? Why did it feel like he was writing a magnificent masterpiece? Ning Ke thought silently, and then he replied with a smile, "In that case, there's no hurry. The second name on the paper seems to be a little troublesome, so I don't plan to do it for now. Let's wait until the matter with Zhang Ichi calms down. Besides, I have to prepare for the Academy entrance exam. When we were in the city of Wei, young master, you often worried that those old guys would die of illness or old age before you started your revenge. But since I've already waited for more than 10 years, I believe that old Master Haotian would definitely give me dozens of days." Revenge was a comprehensive project, especially when you were just a nobody, and the targets of your revenge were all bigwigs in the upper echelons of the empire. This project would be unimaginably complicated. Ning Ke didn't have the luck of a certain count, nor the forbearance of a certain eunuch, so he had to be more cautious. After staying at Lin 47th Street for 2 days, he went to the market to inquire about the interesting things that happened in Chang'an City. He found that the death of the censor Zhang Ichi didn't cause too much of a disturbance, but it attracted countless gossip and ridicule from the people of Chang'an. There were countless versions of what happened at the side door of the brothel, but most of the narrators tended to link the censor's death with the misfortune of his wife. Just as Ning Ke expected, the powerful wife of the censor was now making a scene in the Chang'an local government, but the House of Red Sleeves only closed for a day before reopening. It seemed that although the imperial court hadn't concluded the case, they basically thought that there was nothing suspicious about the censor's death. On the 3rd day, Ning Ke knew that he should go to the House of Red Sleeves again, or else the girls in the brothel and the maidservant Xiao Chao would definitely find it strange if he behaved so differently from before. This time, he decided to bring Sang Sang along. Sang Sang tied up her hair and hid it under her hat. She changed into Ning Kei's coarse clothes and didn't need to disguise herself anymore. With her tanned face and extremely ordinary eyebrows, she looked just like an inconspicuous manservant. "It's not raining today, why bring that to attract people's attention?" he said, pointing at the big black umbrella on Sangsang's back. Sangsang shook her head and insisted on her own opinion. Ning Kei ignored her, knowing that she was worried about the aftermath of the censor Zhang Yiqi's death. It was safer for them to bring the big black umbrella. However, he didn't expect that the moment they closed the door of the old brush pen shop, they were blocked by a group of people. This group of people were all strong men. In the spring, their chests were exposed, revealing their strong chest muscles and 2 or 3 strands of black chest hair to show their strength and bravery. There were 2 local government runners of Chang, and local government standing under the tree in the distance, looking at the people making trouble but expressionless. This showed that their bravery were recognized by the government. A vigilant look appeared on Sangsang's face. She subconsciously stretched her right hand behind her back and tightly held the big black umbrella. Ning Kei, however, was not nervous at all. He looked at the 2 local government runners of Chang, and local government standing under the tree in the distance, and noticed that they didn't bring any chains or iron handcuff. Then he guessed the origin of this group of strong men. The leader of the strong men was about 30 years old. He didn't yell and insult as Ning Kei had imagined, and then order his men to break into the old brush pen shop to smash and rob it. Instead, he politely cupped his hands and bowed to Ning Quebec. He said in a low voice, "You are the little boss, right? I came here a few days ago, but you were not here at that time, so I couldn't talk about some things." Ning Kei turned sideways and glanced at Sangsang. When he was about to ask her about it, he suddenly remembered that she had mentioned it to him. He turned around and looked at the man, answering gently, "What can I do for you, big brother? I believe by now you should know why you are the only shop on Lin 47th Street. The man directly stated his conditions. I'll buy out your shop contract with 200 taels of silver. You can go find another shop. If there are any losses in the process, you can tell us. If it's reasonable, we're willing to pay for it. We only have one request for you, and that is to move out immediately." These conditions were really good. Ning Kei sighed with emotion as he looked at this group of men. He thought to himself that Chang was indeed the most benevolent city under the rule of the emperor. Even if they were to do a demolition, it was still so generous. Chapter 48. Ning Kei looked at the man and said sincerely, "I have to admit that your conditions are excellent." The man replied with a smile, "I work for the government, so of course I have to do a good job. Little boss, let me tell you, the imperial court is not short of money, so I won't take too much from you. As long as you are willing to move out, we can discuss the price. In short, it's good for you, good for me, and good for everyone." The price offered by the man was very fair, even beyond the scope of fairness. If Ning Kei closed the old brush pen shop and moved out, he would not suffer any loss, and could even make a profit from it. Of course, he also understood that his shop was like a small card in the hands of the owner. Although it was not a big card, the owner would have more confidence when negotiating with the government. Otherwise, his small card would not be worth so much money. He subconsciously glanced at Sangsang to see what she was thinking. However, Sangsang's little face was still emotionless as usual, and he could not tell whether she agreed or disagreed with him. He wanted to say yes, but he thought of the middle-aged owner with a sword on his waist who entered the old brush pen shop on the first day of its opening, and felt that this matter was full of mystery. The man looked at Ning Kei and said with a frown, "Little boss, whether it's a deal or not, you have to say something, right?" Ning Kei moved closer to the man and said with a smile in a low voice, "Brother, I come from a small place, and I don't mean to go against you. I'm just a little curious. If it doesn't work out, what are you going to do?" If these words were said by a big-bellied shop owner, the man might really think that Ning Ke was provoking him and would have slapped him. However, Ning Ke had the advantage of a young face and a good attitude. After a slight pause, the man explained seriously, "It's inevitable to dump a few carts of garbage in front of your shop and throw bricks in the middle of the night. If you really make people angry, they might sneak into your shop and dirty the well in the backyard. Little boss, we rely on this to make a living." Upon hearing this answer, Ning Ke was slightly startled. He sighed silently in his heart. If there is a bright moon in the night sky of the Tang Empire, then the bright moon in the Tang Empire has indeed shone on the people of today, just like in ancient times. The men surrounding the old brush pen shop were obviously bad people in Jianghu, and they were working for the Yamen of Chang, and local government and the shipping department of the Ministry of Revenue, which would be extremely troublesome. Ning Ke knew very well that even though these people were trying to persuade him nicely, if he really insisted on not moving, who knew how many dirty things would happen? He was not afraid of going against people from the Jianghu. The key was that he had just killed the censor and was about to participate in the academy entrance exam of the academy in 20 days. He did not want too many things to happen in between, so he could not help but be tempted by the suggestion. At this moment, a series of orderly footsteps came from the other end of Lin 47th Street, followed by an extremely sharp voice. The words spoken were extremely harsh, and revealed a sense of ruthlessness. "Dumping garbage, throwing bricks, and polluting the well? Since when did you bastards become so daring? Or have you done it on Lin 47th Street before? If you have done it, why are your hands still on your wrist?" A group of men dressed in green clothes, green trousers, and green cloth boots came from the other end of the street. The one who spoke had thin eyebrows, thin eyes, a thin voice, and a slim figure. His green clothes seemed to be swaying in the wind like a bamboo pole. He walked to the door of the old brush pen shop and first saluted Ning Ke with his hands folded in front of his chest. Then he turned to look at the men and said mockingly, "A bunch of hooligans in Southern City who can't make a name for themselves actually dare to imitate others and play forced demolition? Do you dare to do any of the things I have just mentioned in Lin 40th Street? Aren't you afraid that I will break your legs?" The man who had negotiated with Ning Ke showed a trace of fear on his face. He glanced at the local government runner under the tree behind him, straightened his chest again, and sneered, "Mr. Chi, you have to make it clear. We don't do those things because we think they are dirty. Since the little boss is a reasonable person, why should I do that?" Mr. Chi raised his nose and spat at the man's feet. "Bah! Gu Xiaoqiong, you shut up! If it weren't for the fact that Lin 47th Street is my brother's property, how could you bastards pretend to be scholars?" Gu Xiaoqiong stretched his neck and shouted, "What? I didn't use a knife or a stick. I just talked business with the little boss and bought his shop lease with money. Can't I do that? If you say it violates any law of the Tang Empire, let's go to the Chang and local government for a lawsuit." Mr. Chi spat again and turned to look at Ning Quebec. He casually saluted with his hands folded in front of his chest and said, "Little boss, you are willing to open your shop here, which means you are giving face to us 3,000 brothers. Don't worry about running your shop here. If anyone dares to hurt you, I will chop off his head to apologize to you." Seeing that the two sides were facing each other, Ning Ke looked a little anxious, but he was not nervous at all. He was watching how the gangs in Chang and city did things with great interest. After a while, he found out that the middle-aged man who rented the shop to him was obviously in a high position in the Chang and underworld. It was difficult for the government to use a hooligan to do things. He was guessing when the fight would start in front of the audience of the gangster movie. Unexpectedly, the question was turned to him again. He hurriedly smiled and said, "Mr. Chi, I'm very grateful that your boss has exempted me from the rent for 3 months. But today, Mr. Gu has offered a really good price." It was easier to talk when one had more to say. At this point, he stopped talking. Gu Xiaoqiong's face was full of joy when he heard this. He looked at Mr. Qi and said with a smile, "Mr. Qi, listen carefully. This is what the little boss said." Mr. Qi snorted and turned to look at Ning Ke, asking, "How much did he promise you?" 200 taels of silver. Ning Ke stretched out 2 fingers. After thinking for a while, he hurriedly added, "If the business suffers losses, Mr. Gu promised to make up for it." Mr. Qi looked at Ning Ke sarcastically. Suddenly, he pointed at the bluestone bricks under his feet and said harshly, 200 taels of silver? Is there such a fair price in Chang'an? Don't tell me there is. It's right on this Lin 47th Street. Why? Because my brother is kind enough to protect all the shop owners on this street. Those people in Southern City had no choice but to offer such a high price. But what happened in the end? These King little bosses took the money and left. Gu Xiaoqiong showed an embarrassed look. As a matter of fact, the trouble on this street had been going on for nearly half a year. The backers of both sides were so angry that they didn't care about the profits and losses at all. They just wanted to rob this street. It was not convenient for the government to deal with them directly. The gangsters in Southern City, who were ordered around, didn't dare to offend the boss. In the end, they had to use the money to clear the way. Some shop owners ran away after getting the benefits, while others didn't dare to offend either side and would rather sell their shops at a low price at a loss. But no matter what, the people in Southern City had to make money without blood or tears. Upon hearing this, Ning Ke silently calculated in his heart. He realized that it was indeed better for the owner to sell the benefits to the government. If the owner was really thinking for the sake of these shop owners, he could really be considered benevolent. Mr. Qi looked at Ning Ke coldly and was about to lose his temper. Suddenly, he remembered his big brother's advice. He forcibly suppressed his anger and said loudly, "They gave you 200 taels of silver? We'll waive your rent for a year. And we'll keep the piece for you for free." Chapter 49. Gu Xiaoqiong was dumbfounded. He looked at him and said, "Mr. Qi, that's not kind of you. How can you raise the price like this?" Mr. Qi roared, "Kind my ass? How can I be kind to you when you want my brother's business?" Gu Xiaoqiong's face turned red after being scolded. He gritted his teeth and said to Ning Ke, "A fixed price. 500 taels of silver. To tell you the truth, I've spent all the wages of the previous 2 shops. I can't afford any more." Mr. Qi looked at him with a sneer and said sarcastically, "You are so stingy. Is this how Taitu Song teaches his son? You are not generous at all. Let me tell you how to quote the price." He turned to Ning Ke and said proudly, "Little boss, as long as you are willing to continue to open the shop on this street, as long as I am alive, no one will charge you the rent." Before he finished his sentence, Ning Ke waved his hand to stop him and asked with a gentle smile, "Mr. Qi, you said before that the rent is free for 1 year?" Mr. Qi was stunned and replied, "Yes. That's fine." Ning Ke turned around and bowed to Gu Xiaoqiong and those strong men. He said with a gentle smile, "I'm really sorry. I plan to continue to run this shop. Please go back." Hearing this, the crowd around the old brush pen shop was stunned. It was not because of Ning Ke's choice, but because Mr. Qi was about to quote a sky-high price, which was equal to giving the shop to Ning Ke for free. However, Ning Ke agreed to the condition before Mr. Qi said anything. Mr. Qi was stunned for a long time, and his face gradually became solemn and serious. He cupped his hands in front of his chest and said in a sonorous and forceful voice, "Boss, you're young, but you're generous and righteous. Just because of your words, you can just tell me my name if you need anything in the future. You can do whatever you want in the Eastern City." Gu Xiaoqiong was also stunned for a long time. His dull eyes looked back and forth between Ning Ke and Mr. Qi. He thought of the angry scolding of his eldest brother, Taitu Song, the slap left on his eldest brother's face by his eldest brother's eldest brother, and the deadline for the support of his eldest brother's eldest brother. He could not help but subconsciously turn his head and look at the two government runners under the tree. Today at Lin 47th Street, the two Yamen runners of Chang and local government turned a deaf ear to the gathering of gangsters. Obviously, they had neglected their duty. When they saw Gu Xiaoqiong's pitiful eyes asking for help, they coughed and walked towards the old brush pen shop with their swords hanging from their waists. Looking at the two runners, Mr. Qi suddenly became extremely cold and angry. He said to Ning Ke in a cold voice, "Little boss, didn't I say that you can do whatever you want in Dongqing?" For some unknown reason, Ning Ke chose to speak at this time and answered with a smile. Mr. Qi sneered and said, "Well, I'll show you why I dare to boast like that. What are you doing here? Do you want to make trouble?" The runner walked to the front of the crowd and scolded them. "Yes." Mr. Qi answered indifferently, and then waved his hand and said, "I want to make trouble, and I want to make it bigger. Brothers, go up and greet these two officers." As soon as he finished speaking, the group of men in cyan shirts, trousers, and boots surrounded them. It was unknown who gave the first punch, but after a moment, the punches and kicks hit the two Yamen runners like a storm. The two Yamen runners were still shouting and cursing. After showing their identities, they wanted to pull out their swords, but were kicked down. After a while, they were beaten badly and rolled on the ground with their heads in their hands. They could not curse, but only moaned painfully. Even the two waist swords that represented their identities were thrown out of the crowd. Previously, Ning Ke only felt that the underworld of Chang and was well-behaved and well-mannered. But now, seeing the two official swords thrown out of the crowd, he realized that the underworld of Chang and could be so cruel that they even dared to beat the officers. He looked at the scuffle outside the shop in astonishment. He was so shocked that he couldn't speak when he saw the two runners with their heads bleeding. Gu Xiaoqiong and the gangsters from the southern city, who were standing not far away, had even more interesting expressions on their faces. Since they got involved in the matter of Lin 47th Street, they had not really confronted with the power of their boss. It was not until now that they knew how arrogant they were. "Well, stop fighting," Mr. Qi, who had been looking on coldly with his arms crossed, said, and the men in cyan clothes dispersed. He walked to the two Yamen runners and said in a cold voice, "You dare to kill my brothers. Don't blame me for being rude." The younger Yamen runner stared at his face and said, "You dare to beat officers. Just wait to be beheaded. Would you like to chop me to death now? Maybe it will be worthwhile." Ning Ke secretly sighed with emotion. Sure enough, the people of Chang'an were so ambitious. Even a little Yamen runner could still be so tough under this situation. Mr. Qi squatted down and patted his face contemptuously. "Don't scare me with this. We are all dogs raised by adults. You two dogs only wear one more piece of clothing than me. Of course, your clothes are very expensive, so I dare not to kill you. But do you think those adults will care if dogs bite each other on the street?" After saying this, Mr. Qi turned around and bowed to Ning Ke, and then led his subordinates to leave arrogantly. Gu Xiaoqiong and the other gangsters of Southern City gathered together to discuss for a while, and then went forward to support the two badly wounded runners to leave. No one looked at Ning Ke and his servant, because they all knew that since Mr. Qi had spoken, it was meaningless to threaten Ning Ke before suppressing the opponent's momentum or killing him, except to make themselves look stingy. The dispute on Lin 47th Street ended like this, and there was no follow-up. As Mr. Qi said, the owners of the two sides were not interested in interfering in this kind of dog-eat-dog thing. But Ning Ke still couldn't understand something. Although the Yamen runners were small figures, they wore official uniforms and carried official swords, which represented the face of the imperial court and the dignity of the empire. Even if the boss behind Mr. Qi, who was the middle-aged man who came into the shop to hide from the rain that day, had a strong background, it was still too arrogant to beat an officer in the street. Moreover, Mr. Chi didn't deal with those gangsters from the South City, but beat the yamen runners of the Chang and local government for no reason. Unless there was a deep hatred between the two sides. Thinking of his own speculation and that thing, he frowned slightly and then relaxed again. Today's purpose was to show up at the House of Red Sleeves, and at the same time go shopping to dissipate the pleasure brought by the first step of revenge. As for those troublesome new hatred that had to be solved in the future, he would think about it later. It was a long distance from the Lin 47th Street to the House of Red Sleeve. Usually, Ning Ke would take a carriage that traveled across the city. But today, with Sang Sang as his companion, he was not afraid of boredom and naturally chose to walk. Neither of them took the previous confrontation seriously. Ning Ke was used to bloody and dangerous scenes, while Sang Sang's mind had no capacity for other things except for some important things. Therefore, they were in a good mood walking through the street. They went to the Shenghua workshop, Tongda Street, went to the bookstore, bought some cheap lotus leaf rice, and crossed the Vermilion Bird Avenue as fast as they could. Then, they found a lively place. Led by an old man in a Taoist robe, dozens of people of Chang'an were kowtowing to an altar. Ning Ke asked the onlookers beside him, and then he knew that a Taoist temple in the South School of Haotian Taoism was holding a blessing ceremony, hoping to move the spring rain from Chang'an to the dry northern region. The Taoist priest beside the altar had silver hair and a long beard, and his Taoist robe was fluttering in the wind, looking like an immortal. The wooden sword in his hand was buzzing in the air, and several pieces of fu papers were shaking in the direction of the sword tip, on which some vermilion characters could be vaguely seen. A moment later, with a sound of chi, the wooden sword broke through the air and stabbed into the yellow sand of the altar in front of it. Those fu papers had already been burned by the wind and turned into ashes on the surface of the yellow sand. Chapter 50. The people who were kneeling in front of the altar and worshipping devoutly were still devout, but the surrounding people cheered in unison. This scene gave people the feeling that it was like the reaction of the audience when a juggler performed a dangerous trick in the fragrance workshop. The ceremony of praying for blessing and moving the rain was officially over. The little Taoist children were preparing to move the altar and ritual objects into the Taoist temple. Unexpectedly, the sky suddenly darkened and the spring rain fell again. Sang Sang opened the big black umbrella with both hands and looked at Ning Ke proudly with her little black face. The onlookers who did not have umbrellas scattered and hid under the eaves of the street. They looked at the embarrassed Taoist children and even faintly heard some mocking voices. Looking at this scene, Ning Ke could not help but laugh. Suddenly, he thought of something. When he looked at the old Taoist priest in the drizzle again, there was more shock in his eyes than pity. He believed in his eyesight. The wooden sword and fu paper were not tricks, so it could only be cultivation methods. According to the knowledge taught by Liu Qinchen, even if the old Taoist had not entered the third state of cultivation, the no-doubt state, he had at least been immersed in the second state of perception for a long time. In the whole world, except for the West Hill, Chang'an was probably the city with the most cultivators. But he never thought that he would meet a cultivator while strolling around with Sang Sang. And this Taoist priest, who was about to enter the real state, even had to rely on these methods to perform. It was a pity that the Taoist temple wanted to use this method to attract believers, but Lord Haotian, whom they worshipped, did not give them face. Actually, even those sages who had entered the limitless state and Tianqi state, as mentioned by Liu Qinchen, did not have the ability to summon wind and rain, not to mention this old Taoist priest whose cultivation state was not high enough. Ning Ke frowned slightly and looked at the gradually closing door of the Taoist temple. He remembered something. Haotian Taoism was known as the only orthodox religion in the world and was highly respected in all countries. The Taoist temple occupied countless fields and never paid taxes. The divine priests of each branch were highly respected. In countries like the Great River Kingdom and the South Jin Kingdom, when their monarchs ascended the throne, they even needed the blessing and approval of the great divine priest of Haotian Taoism from the West Hill. However, judging from the ridicule of the onlookers just now, one could tell that the status of Haotian Taoism in the Tang Empire was far lower than that of their counterparts in other countries. Although the priest of the South School of Haotian Taoism was conferred as the nation master of the Tang Empire, the whole world knew that the relationship between the South School of Haotian Taoism and the West Hill, where the sacrificial hall of Haotian Taoism was located, had always been ambiguous. The right to confer the title of the Abbey Dean of each Taoist temple was all in the hands of His Majesty, and the West Hill could not interfere at all. There was even a rumor that Haotian Taoism was forbidden to preach within the borders when the Tang Empire was founded. Logically speaking, Haotian Taoism, known as the world's #1 orthodox sect, with hundreds of millions of believers and extremely powerful strength, could not tolerate this kind of suppression and humiliation. In fact, they did not tolerate it. Everyone believed that the shadow of the West Hill Divine Kingdom must have been behind the historical curtain of the 17 countries' war against the Tang Empire. At that time, the allied forces of the 17 countries, which claimed to have millions of soldiers, invaded the territory of the Tang Empire, but they were directly crushed into pieces by the empire's vigorous cavalry, which was like the rising sun. Then, the army of the Tang Empire seized the opportunity to attack the Yanggu Pass like a tide, sweeping the world and destroying countless cities. After this magnificent battle, the so-called Allied forces melted like ice and snow. 3 of the countries were directly conquered by the Tang Empire and became the 3 counties of Hebei province today. These 3 counties were also the 3 counties that Emperor Taizu of the Tang Empire squeezed the most during his expedition to the north. What was puzzling was that in this magnificent war of the world, the West Hill Divine Kingdom had always stayed out of it, and the countless hidden powerhouses of Haotian Taoism had never taken action. Perhaps because of this, when the power was redivided after the war, the Tang Empire did not deliberately attack Haotian Taoism again, and Haotian Taoism finally obtained the qualification to preach within the territory of the Tang Empire. After this battle, the Tang Empire established its position as the world's hegemon. Haotian Taoism still had the most believers in the world, one in the secular world and the other in the religion. Both sides hated each other, and because they did not have the confidence to fight each other, they pretended not to see each other, and gradually lost interest in fighting each other. This situation had been maintained for 1,000 years, and there was no change until now. Therefore, Haotian Taoism was still superior in other places. In the territory of the Tang Empire, even the smallest Taoist temple had to pay taxes. In other places, all the people were believers of Haotian Taoism. In the territory of the Tang Empire, even the South School of Haotian Taoism, which was controlled by the imperial court, had to send out cultivators to perform tricks on the streets for the people of the Tang Empire to see if they wanted to attract believers. Walking in the rain under the big black umbrella, Ning Ke thought of the previous scene and couldn't help shaking his head with a smile. He said, "Speaking of which, that old Taoist is really pitiful. I wonder if the nation master of the Tang Empire is the same in the palace." Holding the big black umbrella with her right hand and shoulder, Sang Sang was eating a wife cake bought from an unknown stall in her left hand. She said with a lisp, "Young master, it seems that you like Chang'an very much. Different places and cities nourish different people, but the taste of people can also change the taste of the city." Ning Ke answered with a smile, "Rather than saying that I like Chang'an, I like the people of Chang'an." As he said this, he suddenly frowned and said, 3, 4, 7, 8. Sang Sang was stunned and stuffed the wife cake into her small mouth. Her left hand quickly reached out to a place on his back and scratched twice. Ning Ke frowned and took the heavy big black umbrella from her hand. He corrected, "No, it's still 7 and 7. Got it." In the continuous spring rain in Chang'an, a big black umbrella like a dusty black lotus was walking between the straight streets and winding alleys, between the eaves of the high-rise buildings, and among the pedestrians with umbrellas and straw raincoats. Under the big black umbrella, Sang Sang held the wife cake in one hand and kept scratching Ning Kei's itch with the other. Both of them looked happy and satisfied. Except for those who sold umbrellas and ran carriage businesses, there were probably no businessmen in the world who liked the spring rain in Chang'an every year. Brothels were no exception. Because of the accident that happened outside the side door a few days ago, the House of Red Sleeves was forced to close for one night. Also, some unlucky rumors were spread. Now the light rain outside the building was suitable for playing the zither and painting, but it looked a little lonely in broad daylight. The girls who were qualified to have their own small courtyard could not bear the loneliness and gathered in front of the building. After greeting Mistress Jian, they went to the music room and chatted with each other to kill time by eating melon seeds. Until Ning Kei and his handmaiden stepped in, the situation suddenly changed. For a moment, the whole building was filled with silver bell-like laughter. In a quiet room on the top floor, a man about 40 years old saw this scene and looked at the girls under him. He could not help frowning and scolded in a low voice. They really think that they are young ladies with nothing to do. Meng 3, asked Mistress Jian. Remember to be respectful. Who is that lad? If he has no background, drive him away. The young ladies I pay for are not here to chat with him. I advise you not to be rough with that lad, because he is my last tenant. Beside the small table, a middle-aged man looked at him and said with a smile. The sword at his waist was quietly placed aside. This man was the owner of all the shops on Lin 47th Street. Chapter 51. Ning Kei didn't know that the boss of the House of Red Sleeves was looking at him coldly from the top floor, and he didn't know that the boss was angry at him for teasing the girls instead of doing his job. He was still sitting beside Dewdrop as usual, chatting with her while discreetly asking if Zhang Ichi's death had aroused any suspicion. I like the way you smile. Look at your cute little dimples. Dewdrop rolled her eyes and said, but then again, since you want to enter the academy, you have to study seriously. Otherwise, if you can't get in, people will definitely say that we girls have harmed you. How will you compensate us then? Don't talk about us. Ning Kei comes here every day just to chat with you. It has nothing to do with us. A girl joked. Dewdrop's words seemed to be joking, but in fact she was really concerned about him. Ning Kei felt a little warm in his heart. He smiled and replied with some nonsense like, I've prepared my homework and don't worry. Sang Sang lowered her head to eat melon seeds and chatted with the maidservant Xiao Xiao. She thought that her young master's words were not nonsense but lies. There were 6 courses in the academy entrance examination, and she urged him every day. How many courses had he read? Although she didn't need to disguise herself as a manservant, the girls in the brothel had sharp eyes and could tell that she was an ugly girl the moment she entered the brothel. Xiao Xiao chatted with her and thought that Ning Kei must think that Sang Sang was ugly, so he shamelessly went to the brothel every day. In the room on the top floor, the middle-aged man in a turquoise robe walked slowly to the boss of the House of Red Sleeves. He stood side by side and looked downstairs. He looked at the lad who was sitting in a chair and talking with the girls around him gently. He couldn't help smiling, and his handsome and steady eyes suddenly brightened. If this lad is the last tenant of Lin 47th Street, then I have no reason to tolerate him. The man smiled and said, if you drive him away, all the lease contracts will be in my hands, and then I will transfer them to the Yamen. Do you have any reason to refuse the requisition of that street by the Chang'an local government? All the shop owners on Lin 47th Street have been driven away by you, but have you ever seen me lower my head? The middle-aged man in a turquoise robe smiled and said, moreover, you can't drive this lad away. You can't chase him away? The man quietly stared at his eyes and suddenly laughed, saying, yeah, Who would dare to do anything to you, old Chow of the Spring Breeze Pavilion? The green-robed middle-aged man smiled and didn't answer. He turned around and sat back in his chair. He had already received a message from Old Four and knew what had happened on Lin 47th Street today. A little scholar who came to Chang and to prepare for the exams was fearless in front of the two gangs who were about to have a bloody fight. He even took advantage of the situation to raise the price and snatched a year's rent from his hand. What was more puzzling to him was that the lad didn't raise the price sky-high. Instead, he seemed to be very experienced and had a sense of propriety. In other words, he was very magnanimous. On the first day of the opening of the old brush pen shop, he went to Lin 47th Street not to take shelter from the rain, but to see which fool dared to rent his shop. Who knew that the lad might not know what had happened in the Jianghu of Chang'an City, but he was definitely not a fool. In this world, no fool could write such good calligraphy, and no fool could leave such a thick knife callus between his thumb and index finger. Thinking of the strength and even the vague killing intent in the ink on the wall of the old brush pen shop and Chi Iv's description of the scene today, the middle-aged man even suspected that the lad had killed people. No, it should be suspected that the lad had killed a lot of people. It was hard to believe that he had killed a lot of people at the age of 15 or 16, for someone who had been walking in the darkness and blood all year round. For such a lad, as long as he didn't want to move, who could force him to move? Old Chow, I'm asking you a question on behalf of the prince's mansion. Can you show some respect? The middle-aged man raised his head and found that he was lost in thought because he was thinking about the lad. He couldn't help but smile apologetically. The words "prince's mansion" seemed to have no effect on his carefree mind. The man who talked to him today was named Chui Delu. Although it was a tacky name, he was definitely not a layman. A man who could manage the #1 brothel in Chang'an City couldn't be too tacky. Most people in Chang'an thought that the brothel was owned by a high-ranking official of the Chang'an local government. However, only people like the middle-aged man knew that Chui Delu relied on the steward of the prince's mansion. Some even suspected that the brothel itself was the property of the prince. The House of Red Sleeves has been in some trouble recently. I really didn't expect that Brother Chui would still have the time to chat about those things. Chui Delu's face turned slightly cold. He said, "You should know that the Lin 47th Street is not what the prince's mansion wants. It's just that it's inconvenient for the military ministry and the Ministry of Revenue to take care of it, so it was handed over to us who ran errands. Who knew that you've been stubbornly refusing to let it go, which made the officials in the ministry unhappy. That's why the matter has become so serious. A few days ago, the Chang'an local government tried to clean up your place, but you took the blame. In the end, even the Yulin Royal Guards were dispatched." Hearing the words Yulin Royal Guards, the middle-aged man frowned slightly, as if he was feeling a dull pain. Seeing his expression, Chui Delu changed the topic and said with a smile, "Of course, you should know that the prince's mansion has to receive some benefits for helping those two departments. However, the steward said that the prince likes you more. He once mentioned your name after drinking, saying that you are well-behaved and know your limits in Chang'an City." The middle-aged man remained silent, but the dark color between his eyebrows became more and more conspicuous. Chui Delu continued to say seriously, "You also know that a censor died in my brothel 2 days ago. It's very troublesome. That unlucky censor died a violent death, but his family made a fuss to the Chang'an local government. The prince and the censor were old friends, so he couldn't talk to them at this moment. Therefore, I have to deal with it myself. If you have a way to settle this matter for me, then I won't meddle in the affairs of the Lin 47th Street anymore." Although the other party was just a brothel owner, and although he kept saying, I, the middle-aged man was very clear that the other party represented the prince's attitude, and the voice came from the prince's mansion. After pondering for a while, he smiled and said. Even if your Highness and the censor were old friends, it's too easy to settle this matter. Why do you need us, who are in Jianghu, to do it? Cui Delu said with a gloomy face. Do you really not understand, or are you pretending not to understand? If it's the former, then from now on, you, old Chow from the Spring Breeze Pavilion, will not exist in my eyes because you're too stupid. If it's the latter, then from now on, you, old Chow from the Spring Breeze Pavilion, will not exist in my eyes, because you're too smart and don't know how to appreciate favors. The middle-aged man calmly replied, The matter of the Lin 47th Street is not a big deal to the prince, and it's also not a big deal to me, old Chow from the Spring Breeze Pavilion. If the imperial court really needs it, I'm willing to offer it with both hands, but you shouldn't use this matter to pressure me. The rule of the Spring Breeze Pavilion is not to participate in the struggle of the imperial court, whether it's your Highness, the military ministry or the Ministry of Revenue. As long as it's related to these things, I'll go as far as I can. The more you pressure me, the farther I'll go. You, old Chow from the Spring Breeze Pavilion, are the leader of the biggest gang in Chang'an City, with thousands of subordinates following you to make a living. The imperial court has given you the work of transportation and escort, but you say you want to leave? Do you think you can leave by yourself? Where do you want to go? Where can your 3,000 subordinates go? The prison of the Ministry of Justice or the prison of the frontier fortress? Cui Delu stared at him with gloomy eyes and said, In the past few years the imperial court was peaceful, and it might be possible to be wise to protect oneself. But now the fourth princess has come back, and she is determined to protect her own brother to be the crown prince. But she has forgotten that the Empress is still on the throne, and the Empress also has a son. Of course, these family affairs have nothing to do with you, but at this time, if you still don't show your attitude and become a dog of any family, then no family will tolerate you. As a dog, it turns out that I have to find a master? The middle-aged man let out a long sigh, looked at him and asked, So you want to subdue me for His Highness? Yes, now all the people in Chang'an City who are qualified to speak are suppressing you. Why? Because you're a dog without a master. In this case, if you're willing to rely on any family, whether it's the military ministry or anyone else, as long as you have a master, others will have to consider the person holding your leash if they want to beat you. Can I ask a question? The middle-aged man suddenly said with a smile. Please. Between the Empress and the fourth princess, who will His Highness support? Cui Delu said decisively, Of course not. His Highness will always be loyal to His Majesty. As long as His Majesty says yes, His Highness will support that person. After hearing this answer, the middle-aged man was silent for a long time, and then he slowly raised his head and replied with a smile, Sorry, as a man of the Tang Empire, I'm really not used to being a dog. Cui Delu was stunned, forcibly suppressed his anger, and bitterly persuaded, In this life, people will always be dogs, and some people want to be dogs but can't. The middle-aged man stood up, tied his sword to his waist, and elegantly cupped his hands and said, Mr. Cui, you're really not a competent lobbyist, because you don't know the character of old Chow of the Spring Breeze Pavilion. Cui Delu's face was a little ugly, and he stood up and said in a low voice, Are you worried that this decision won't convince the public? Don't worry, His Highness has said that as long as you're willing to bow down, even if it's symbolic, he will let the military ministry give you an explanation and give you 2 heads. You're a grand gang leader, can't you control those lowly people? At this point, he no longer cared about using the steward of the prince's mansion as a filter, and directly mentioned His Highness. However, it seemed that the middle-aged man didn't hear it at all, and directly walked out of the door. No one noticed that when Cui Delu said the 4 words, Grand Gang Leader, there was a trace of an incomprehensible smile between his eyebrows. Old Chow, stop right there. Cui Delu gloomily stared at the back of his head, It seems that you and your brothers have been doing well in Chang and these years, and have long forgotten how to write the word ah. But I have to remind you that these nobles are the real nobles, and it's not a world that a cockroach crawling in the gutter like you can understand. The middle-aged man slowly stopped, but he didn't look back. Chapter 52. Chui Delu looked at the back of the middle-aged man and said coldly, I know what you are relying on. Chang 3, Chi 4, Lu V, Fei 6, and Chen 7. I know you are good at fighting, and so are your brothers. But don't forget that Chang 3 and Fei 6 are the captains of the Yulin Royal Guards, Lu V is the leader of the Valiant Cavalry Battalion, and Chen 7 is an old man who retired from the bodyguard office. If the bigwigs lift their fingers, you will be pressed into the deepest part of the underworld and never be able to rise again. The middle-aged man suddenly turned around and looked at his eyes with a frown. These years, many of your most reliable and capable brothers died. Except for Chi 4, you can only rely on these guys. But you don't understand the power of the nobles. They only need to say a word or a piece of paper to trap your most reliable fighting force in the military camp. Once the bad guys in Chang, and who have been suppressed by you for more than 10 years know this news, they will be happy to jump out and bite you. The middle-aged man was silent for a moment. His expression gradually calmed down and he continued to walk out of the door. Behind him, Chui Delu sneered and said, Old Chow of the Spring Breeze Pavilion, you've stretched your hand too far, and you've even extended it to the imperial court. Now that you're surrounded by enemies, I'd like to see who can tolerate you. The middle-aged man put his right hand on the door and said after a moment of silence, As long as God can tolerate me, I can live. The conversation on the top floor of the House of Red Sleeves, in a sense, determined the natural course of the history of the underground world of Chang'an. When the bigwigs in the imperial court suddenly became interested in the weeds in Jianghu, no matter how strong the weeds were and how strong their desire to live was, they would be like the grassland after a wildfire, leaving only blackened wastes and residual roots in the soil. They would never be as lush as before. This was the smell of power. The wife of the censor Zhang Yiqi had been used to this smell all her life. So when Zhang Yiqi suddenly died, she couldn't accept the fact at all. She took the body of the old master home with the female army who made trouble in the brothel and cried for 2 days. Then she began to run between the supreme judiciary and the Chang, and local government which was responsible for the security of the capital. Unfortunately, this time it was her turn to smell the smell of power, which became a little worse. How could my old master have such a short life? He told me that 27 years ago, the state preceptor had read his fortune and said that he would definitely live to 100 years old. In my opinion, my master must have been killed by the vixen in that brothel. Governor, you have to help me. If you dare to cover that brothel, I will go to the prince's mansion to seek justice for my old master. The official sitting on the stage was in his early 40s. He had triangular eyes, a rosacea nose, and a sparse beard on his chin. His appearance was not elegant at all. In the officialdom of the Tang Empire, which paid great attention to the appearance of a handsome person, this person was not sent to the counties and states below, but stayed in the Chang'an government, which was really unusual. The official looked at the skinny woman standing in the hall and felt a headache because of her words. Fortunately, the officials of the Tang Empire knew the legendary life of the national master very well. After careful calculation, he realized that the national master was just a Taoist servant of the South School of Haotian Taoism 27 years ago. He had not met the current emperor and made a name for himself. At that time, the national master's fortune-telling for Zhang Yiqi was mostly to cheat money. Thinking of this, he could not help coughing twice and said solemnly, Ahem, Madam, I'm sorry for your loss. First of all, you have to understand that I'm Shangguan Yangyu, the judicial military advisor of the Chang'an local government, not the governor. Secondly, the remains of the censor have been examined in detail. It was indeed because the carriage accidentally fell and crushed him, which led to his death from a heavy blow to the brain. It was really not a murder case. Censor Zhang Yiqi's death at the side door of a brothel was a hot topic in Chang'an. But most of them were ridiculed, and no one in the officialdom connected it with murder. In order to avoid those poor censors from making a fuss, the Chang'an local government had already classified the case as a traffic accident 2 days ago. But no one expected that the censor's wife would not let it go and directly went to the supreme judiciary. The censor's job was to offend the officials, so it was impossible for him to be popular. Although Zhang Yiqi was dead, the prince was still there, so no officials would take the opportunity to smear the censor's wife. But no one wanted to be nosy either, so the supreme judiciary directly pushed the censor's wife back to the Chang'an local government. The governor heard the beating of the drum and inquired that it was the fierce censor's wife. He had already sneaked back to the backyard from the side door and told his subordinates that he was not feeling well today and needed to rest. As the judicial military advisor of the Chang'an local government, Shangguan Yangyu was in charge of investigating cases, but he couldn't find a reason to slip away. And he didn't want to. In the eyes of other officials, the censor's wife was a shrew who should not be trifled with. But in his eyes, all the officials' wives were paper tigers. As long as he knew what they were afraid of and scared them, they could be easily dealt with, and he might even get some benefits from it. At such a critical moment, he didn't forget to get benefits, which showed how greedy this judicial military advisor was. And it all started from his origin. Shangguan Yangyu's ancestral home was the South Jin Kingdom. His ancestors moved to Chang'an and settled there for 5 generations. They lived in the poor eastern city for generations, but there was no promising man in his family. They were either gamblers or lustful. For 5 generations, they only managed to save 2 shabby tile-roofed houses and a dozen taels of silver. It was not until Shangguan Yangyu's generation that he was lucky enough to pass the written examination for the government. Then, he started from the lowest jailer and finally became a real official. After becoming the judicial military advisor, Shangguan Yangyu was no longer as low-key and cautious as he used to be. The fear of poverty and the crazy pursuit of money made him start his road of bribery. The Chang'an local government was closely watched by the imperial court, and it was a poor yamen that had to pay taxes. It was impossible for him to take bribes, but he could bend the law. In the case of censor Zhang Yiqi, he didn't dare to wrongly accuse the brothel, but he wanted to see if he could extort some money from the dead man's wife. He squinted at the thin censor's wife, and before she could refute, he beckoned her to come closer and said in a low voice, "Madam, the witnesses are your own guards and attendants. The physical evidence is still piled up in the backyard of the yamen. The censor still smells of cosmetic. And that day when you rushed over with a group of female servants with wooden sticks, half of the people in Chang'an City saw it. You say, the censor didn't kill himself in his own carriage because he was afraid that you were going to the brothel to catch the adulterer. Who would believe that?" The censor's wife's expression suddenly changed. When she was about to scold him, Shangguan Yangyu smiled and squinted his triangular eyes into a small square in the middle of a copper coin. He continued to say in a low voice, "In fact, I also understand that the censor's death is too strange, too stupid, and not pleasant to hear. You have to make a scene to show that you have a clear conscience, so that people won't say that you forced your master to die. Besides, if you really make a scene, the brothel will have to compensate you a lot of money. Alas, when a person dies in the underworld, he can no longer care about the living. What's the use of the compensation and pension given by the imperial court? Of course, it's best to get some money." The censor's wife's skinny face was extremely unnatural. Obviously, Shangguan Yangyu had hit the nail on the head. She hesitated for a long time, and suddenly looked at him expectantly. She lowered her voice and said, "If it's done, I'll give you 20%. If the censor or the palace knew that she dared to make a deal with the law of the Tang Empire in the court, both Shangguan Yangyu and the censor's wife would probably be killed. However, all the people in the Chang and local government were afraid that the censor's wife would make a scene, so it was very quiet in the court. She was not worried that someone would hear it. However, to the censor's wife's surprise, Shangguan Yangyu's face suddenly darkened. He slapped the gavel in his hand and shouted sternly, "What a bold woman! I respect you because your husband is the censor, but you actually want to court death." His shout directly scared the censor's wife. Shangguan Yangyu's face seemed to be drawn, but he quickly became amiable and said earnestly, "I reprimanded you because I want to save you. Do you know who the backer of that brothel is? You actually want to extort money from them? You really have guts." The censor's wife held the table and said in a trembling voice, This. I still need your advice." Shangguan Yangyu naturally could not say that the Chang and local government had some shares in that brothel. He pretended to be mysterious and pointed to the sky. He lowered his voice and said, "That's the property of the Empress." When the censor's wife heard the words, "the Empress," she suddenly panicked and even felt that her knees were a little weak. She said in a trembling voice, "What should we do? What should we do? If you insist on making trouble, I can't guarantee that the censor's reputation can be preserved. After all, someone saw him running out of the brothel, and he was drunk at that time." Shangguan Yangyu looked at her and said seriously, "If the palace knows that the censor visits prostitutes, even if he dies, he will be removed from his official position and all his posthumous salary. At that time, your efforts will be in vain." The censor's wife asked in horror, Then what should I do? I won't sue him, okay? The problem is that this matter has already been made known. However, if you can bribe the person in charge of that brothel, please don't let this matter spread to the palace, especially to the ears of that person. Maybe this matter can still be settled. Then let's do it." The censor's wife had already lost her idea. Her skinny face was full of confusion and nervousness. She asked, "How do you think this matter should be settled?" Shangguan Yangyu smiled slightly. He knew that there would be a sum of money coming into his account soon. He could not help but feel that every pore on his body was relaxed. The censor's wife's skinny face in front of him also became much more pleasing to the eye. He thought proudly in his heart, "How can eating a man be as simple as eating a woman? How can eating a living person be as comfortable as eating a dead person?" He was born poor or even lowly. He had no ancestors, no backers, and an ugly face. When he ate the plaintiff and the defendant, he was as greedy as a locust. When he flattered his superiors, he was as thick-skinned as a wild boar. There was nothing remarkable about his character. However, as long as Lord Haotian did not accept him, he would continue to live stubbornly and ugly like this. As the saying goes, as long as God can tolerate me, I can live. The spring rain continued for another 2 days, but the business at Lin 47th Street was still so quiet. Ning Ke did not know that there was a judicial military adjunct named Shangguan Yangyu in the Chang and local government. Because of the greed in his bones, he helped him solve the little trouble of assassinating the censor Zhang Yiqi. At this time, he was holding a bowl of hot noodles and looking at the bluestone slabs that were constantly being washed by the rain. He was thinking about the academy entrance examination that was coming soon and the expensive tuition and accommodation fees. He felt a little depressed and cold and subconsciously tightened his collar with his left hand. Although he had been exempted from a whole year's rent from the mysterious owner, which was equivalent to earning 300 taels of silver after careful calculation, this silver was not cash but something on paper. If the owner really could not withstand the pressure from the government, or if the old brush pen shop could not continue to operate even without rent, it would be equivalent to zero. Thinking of this, he could not help but sigh again. He lowered his head and used the tip of the chopsticks to pick the noodles in the bowl and poked the fresh green onions. He had no desire to eat at all. These 2 days, he did not even have the interest to write, let alone this bowl of noodles that he had eaten for several years. He could even guess with his eyes closed that there were 4 Sichuan peppers and 30 green onions in it without even smelling it. The rain outside the shop was getting heavier and heavier, hitting the ground and splashing water into mist. The sight was getting worse and worse, and the outer wall of the warehouse of the shipping department of the Ministry of Revenue could not be seen clearly. Ning Kei held the bowl of noodles and walked to the threshold, half squatting to continue watching the rain, and then he lowered his head to eat the noodles. Suddenly, he raised his head and looked up to the right. A middle-aged man holding an oil-paper umbrella appeared outside the old brush pen shop. The arrogant rain had soaked most of his green robe, and the scabbard at his waist was also full of water droplets. He was the owner who had exempted Ning Kei from a year's rent. His green robe was soaked by the rain, and the color of the front and back of his lapel was a little dark. He looked a little embarrassed, but strangely, this middle-aged man did not look embarrassed at all. He held the oil-paper umbrella and stood quietly at the threshold, looking at the uninterrupted rain in front of him with a calm expression, as if he was looking at a street full of peach blossoms and sunshine. Ning Kei looked up at him for a moment without saying anything, and then he lowered his head to eat the noodles. After a long silence, the middle-aged man suddenly looked down at him and said with a smile, "The noodles are very fragrant." Ning Kei squatted on the ground and answered, "I've eaten it too many times. No matter how fragrant it is, it's just like that. I haven't eaten it before. Although you exempted me from a year's rent, I'm not going to treat you to it. I like your writing." The middle-aged man changed the topic very quickly, like the dripping rain in front of them. It slid down the umbrella when it could not penetrate it. From this point, it could be seen that this person was used to giving orders and did not allow his subordinates to question his orders. "I like it too. It's very well written. I know my writing is very good." The middle-aged man smiled and said, "The murderous intent in the words is very strong. I rarely see someone with such a strong murderous intent." Ning Kei lowered his head in silence. He looked at the bowl of noodles in his hand and asked, "Are you going to kill someone tonight?" The middle-aged man replied with a sigh, "Yes, God can tolerate me, but man can't, so I have to kill someone." Chapter 53. Ning Kei looked up at him and asked, "If you want to kill someone, go ahead. Why are you standing in front of my shop?" The middle-aged man replied, "I'm waiting for the rain to stop, and I'm also waiting for a few people. When you wait for the rain to stop, it usually won't stop. When you wait for people to come, they usually won't come." Ning Kei kindly advised, "There must be a reason why they don't come." The middle-aged man smiled and said, "But can you let me have a serious talk with you instead of probing like those sadhus? That's the right attitude. I don't like to walk around in Yunshan." Ning Kei smiled and replied, "But I don't like to squat on the ground and talk to people standing, because there's a height difference. You can stand up. Why don't you squat down?" The middle-aged man smiled and squatted down without any hesitation. The hem of his wet green robe covered the threshold of the old brush pen shop. Then he looked at Ning Kei's young face and said seriously, "I'm having a hard time now." Ning Kei lowered his head and ate his noodles, waiting for him to continue. "Many bigwigs want me to declare my position, but I can't do so in my current situation. So I'm being besieged now. My brothers and I have done things cleanly, and it's not convenient for the government to punish me with the law of the Tang Empire. So they've decided to kill me tonight. My opponents in the South and West City have all rushed here during the night rain. What about the people you're waiting for? One of my brothers died a few days ago. Most of the remaining brothers have jobs in the government. Those big shots can easily use their jobs to trap them in the barracks and yamen. That's why I don't have many people here tonight. The night rain continued, and it seemed to be getting stronger and stronger. It seemed like the person the middle-aged man was waiting for would not arrive, but he did not seem to care. He just calmly and gently talked about the situation he was facing, without any concealment. Then he looked at Ning Ke beside him and said with a smile, "But none of this is a problem. My problem tonight is that I need someone by my side, but I can't find that person." Ning Ke glanced at the sword at his waist and guessed that it should be very small. He asked, "What kind of person do you need by your side?" "Fast, fierce, and brave enough. I can't blink when I kill, and I can't let anything fall on me." "Not including the rain, right?" "Of course not. That's not a high requirement." Ning Ke scratched his damp hair and asked, "Why me?" The middle-aged man's eyes fell on his right hand, which was holding the bowl, and said, "I've inquired about something. Although the woodcutter of Shubi Lake is not famous in Chang'an, I know very well what a teenager who specializes in killing horse gang can do." After a moment of silence, Ning Ke smiled and said, "Why should I go with you? What's in it?" The middle-aged man appreciated the young man's straightforwardness. He flicked the rainwater off the oil paper umbrella and said with a smile, "No one in Chang'an knows my trump card. If I win tonight, I'll reveal my trump card. Then you'll know that I'm really a big thigh, and it's worth it for you to hug it. Since tonight is so dangerous, why don't you use your trump card first? Because a trump card isn't a card, it's a person. I can't order him, but he can order me. He needs me to win tonight's battle, because he wants to see if the opponent has hidden cards in his hand." "Well, I'm really tired of this style of conversation. I just want to say that you may be a big thigh, but it's not very attractive to me. Since you know about the faraway Shubi Lake, then you must know that I once had the opportunity to hug a seemingly thin but actually one of the thickest thighs in the Tang Empire, but I didn't do it." Ning Ke was naturally referring to the fourth princess of the Tang Empire, Li Yu. After saying this, he fell silent again. He put the bowl in his hand on the wet ground and squatted with the middle-aged man, watching the rain. At this moment, he suddenly thought of a scene in a story that he liked very much, and thought of Darky's instructions in the small restaurant, so he made a decision. Note: after a moment of silence, the middle-aged man said, "Or are you used to making a direct offer?" Ning Ke stretched out his hand to slap the annoying rain and said neatly, 500 taels of silver. The middle-aged man frowned and suggested, "That's too little. Should we add a little more?" The scene of the two haggling at the doorstep of the bookstore on a rainy night was really strange. The employer actually thought that the money was too little. Ning Ke turned to look at him and asked, "How many people do you think I'll kill tonight?" The middle-aged man thought for a moment and said, "At least 5. Ning Ke replied, "On the grassland, I might not get 5 taels of silver even if I kill 5 horse gangs. So don't worry, I'll definitely risk my life for 500 taels of silver." "I don't need you to risk your life." The middle-aged man looked at him with a smile and said, "If it's time to risk your life, you can leave first." Ning Ke shook his head and said, "That's not my style. It's really stupid to say that friendship is stronger than gold, but since we're doing business, of course we have to abide by the basic professional ethic." The middle-aged man smiled and reached out his hand. "Deal." Ning Ke reached out and shook his hand gently, then let go. He said, "My surname is Ning. Ning Quebec. My surname is Chow Xiaoshu. What an arrogant surname, what a gentle name. People in Chang'an call me Old Chow of the Spring Breeze Pavilion. You can call me Brother Chow. Chow Xiaoshu sounds better. Xiaoshu, are you the leader of the Fish Dragon Gang?" "You can call me Old Chow. Besides, I've never admitted that I'm the leader of the Fish Dragon Gang. I just gathered a group of brothers to do something inconvenient for the imperial court." Ning Ke finally confirmed his identity and patted his shoulder with a smile. He said, "The leader of the largest gang in Chang and is still so modest. Xiaoshu, you're too hypocritical." He pulled out the ordinary knife from the pile of firewood, found the boxwood bow and arrow quiver from the box, picked up the big black umbrella from the rough celadon jar, wrapped it layer by layer with old cloth, and then tied it all on his back. Then he searched the bottom of the box for a long time and found a black mask that hadn't been washed for a long time. He carefully put on the close-fitting soft armor and put on an old short-sleeved arrow robe. He loosened his hair into the common style of the people of Yueluan Kingdom and covered most of his face with the black mask. Ning Ke carefully looked at himself in the bronze mirror for a long time and confirmed that there were no flaws. He walked to the small kitchen and said, "I'm leaving." Sang Sang was cleaning the kitchen stove and washing the pots, bowls, and brushes. There was no expression on her little face, but there was a vague childish irritation in her slender eyes. For some reason, the little handmaiden put down the bowls and washed the brushes today, making muffled sounds from time to time. She wiped the bottom of the pot with the rag so hard that it seemed to be going through the black bottom of the pot. Ning Ke was slightly startled and then understood. He gently explained, "It's always good to earn some money. And I think that guy should have a strong background. I'll do him a favor in the future." With a bang, Sang Sang threw the rag on the edge of the stove and carried the heavy iron pot to pour the dirty water. The little girl twisted her waist and pretended not to see him or hear his explanation. Ning Ke rubbed his furrowed eyebrows. After a moment of silence he said, "Darky, that idiot, died after a casual sentence. Even if I wanted to make an excuse, I couldn't go to the underworld to find him. So tonight I will pay for him." After saying this, he ignored Song Song's little mood and directly walked out of the back house and into the shop in front. As the leader of the Fish Dragon Gang, the biggest gang in Chang, and Old Chow of the Spring Breeze Pavilion had wandered in Jianghu for many years and seen many strange people. He knew that the young boss of the old brush pen shop must be one of them, so he was mentally prepared. But now seeing Ning Ke dressed like this, he could not help but feel a little surprised. He looked at the mysterious thing wrapped in rags and said with a wry smile, "Looking at your dress, you don't look like you're going to kill people. You look like a poor man who owes gambling debts and is going to run away at night. Are you going to carry all your belongings?" "I only carry a knife. You should be satisfied." Ning Ke walked to his side and glanced at the wind and rain in Lin 40th Street. Noticing that there was no one at either end of the long alley, he could not help but frown and said, "I hope there is no traitor among your brothers. I hope your brothers can keep this alley safe. I don't want the scene of me following you to kill people to become Soa-Tu of the Chang, and local government tomorrow." Old Chow looked down at the black mask covering most of the lad's face and said with a smile, "Actually, you don't have to be so cautious. If you and I are still alive after tonight, then no one in Chang, and or even the whole Tang Empire will dare to make trouble for you as long as you don't violate the law of the Tang Empire." Hearing this, Ning Ke thought to himself, "Who said that the biggest gang in Chang and had no background?" But he did not want to take off his mask to kill people openly. His clear voice came through the black mask, "I'm used to keeping a low profile." Old Chow smiled and did not try to persuade him anymore. The tranquility of the spring night had long been disturbed by the pitter-patter of rain, and now there was the sound of footsteps. Ning Ke walked out of the doorsill, and Chow Xiaoshu opened the seemingly fragile oil-paper umbrella. Both of them walked into the night and the rain at the same time. Sang Sang rushed out. She stood in the doorsill, holding the heavy iron pot in her hands. She looked at the bowl of noodles on the table, and the back of the figure in the alley in the wind and rain. She anxiously shouted, "Young master, you haven't finished your noodles." Ning Ke looked back at her with a smile and said, "Leave it there and continue to eat when you come back." Sang Sang held the big iron pot and leaned her thin shoulders against the shop door, which was wet from the rain. She shouted, "It's not good when it's cold." Ning Ke waved his hand forcefully and replied with a smile, "Then cook another pot and wait for me to come back to eat." Sang Sang tightly pursed her lips and stared blankly at him, turning around and leaving. Finally she shouted, "I'll put more spring onions in it. Young master, remember to come back to eat it." Ning Ke did not answer her, but the smile in his eyes outside the black mask became more and more obvious. Looking at the increasingly dark alley and the increasingly heavy rain, he suddenly asked, "Xiaoshu, where are we going now?" "Spring Breeze Pavilion." Old Xiao calmly replied, "My home is there and so is my enemy. Besides, I still suggest you call me Old Xiao because you are a small tree." It was still raining in the alley. No one knew what was going on in Spring Breeze Pavilion. Chapter 54. Most people in Chang'e knew that for some unknown reason, Old Xiao of Spring Breeze Pavilion was reluctant to mention the name of his gang, the Fish Dragon Gang. He preferred to call the biggest gang in Chang'e and Spring Breeze Pavilion. Many people guessed that it was because he had lived in the Spring Breeze Pavilion Hanger Street since he was a child. His enemies secretly ridiculed him, thinking that he had killed too many people, made too much money, and done too many bad things. But he didn't want others to call him vulgar, so he insisted on associating himself and his gang with the seemingly elegant name of Spring Breeze Pavilion. Spring Breeze Pavilion was located in the slum area of Eastern City. Its buildings were dilapidated. From day to night it was full of peddlers and idlers. It couldn't even be called quiet, so it was not elegant at all. But today, the area of Spring Breeze Pavilion was extraordinarily quiet. It was so quiet that the sound of rain falling was like thunder. It was so quiet that the sound of cold wind blowing through the shabby pancake shop's signboard was like the sound of pines. From the Hanger Street to the Hanger Street, there was no passerby walking in the rain. Not even the cry of a baby could be heard. It was as if nothing existed except for the wind and rain and the streets shrouded by the chilling atmosphere. It was deathly quiet. The distance from Lin 47th Street to Spring Breeze Pavilion was not too far. The two people walked slowly like tourists. It didn't take them long to enter the quiet street and dark alley. The Spring Breeze Pavilion ahead was hidden in the darkness and the sound of wind and rain. They could only vaguely see a shabby pavilion, but they didn't know how many enemies were also hiding inside and outside the Spring Breeze Pavilion. Ning Ke, wearing a black mask and carrying a lot of things on his back, walked behind Xiao Xiaoshu with an oil paper umbrella. He played the role of a waiter very well. No one knew when he had taken the umbrella from Xiao Xiaoshu's hand. Xiao Xiaoshu, as usual, walked with his hands behind his back. Even though his cyan robe was mostly wet by the rain from the oil paper umbrella, he still wore a faint smile on his face, which illuminated the wind and rain outside the umbrella to some extent. It was deathly quiet around the shabby pavilion. The people lying in ambush here didn't expect that there weren't 3,000 brothers in cyan robes as they had imagined, but only Spring Breeze Pavilion's Old Xiao alone. Then, accompanied by wind and rain, he broke in with a silent teenager. After a long period of silence, after confirming that only Old Xiao and Ning Ke of the Spring Breeze Pavilion were there, the enemies hiding in the night wind and rain no longer hid their whereabouts. Accompanied by the continuous footsteps, the patter of the soles of the boots on the shallow water, and the grinding sound of the sharp knives being slowly unsheathed, hundreds of solemn-looking Jianghu men walked out from the back of the pavilion and from the side of the house from the alley. Old Xiao and Ning Ke of the Spring Breeze Pavilion stood not far from the shabby pavilion, quietly watching the dense crowd coming from all directions. Xiao Xiaoshu smiled, and did not ask whether the lad behind him was afraid of such a boring question. He raised his arm to wipe the rainwater off his face and pointed to a slightly plump, middle-aged man in the middle of the crowd. "This man is called Lord Meng, the head of Southern City." The bald man beside him is called Taitu Song. Lord Meng is Taitu Song's elder brother, and Taitu Song is the elder brother of the so-and-so who went to your shop to make trouble that day. As the green-clothed middle-aged man raised his arm, the crowd surrounding them in the rainy night suddenly became restless. The expressions of the men who stood at the very front with sharp blades in their hands to show off their bravery to their boss stiffened, and they subconsciously took a step back. Ning Ke stood behind him and quietly watched this scene. He roughly understood the status of the Fish Dragon Gang in the dark world of Chang'an City and the deterrent power of Old Chow of the Spring Breeze Pavilion in the hearts of these Jianghu people. Chao Xiaoshu smiled and did not say anything to ridicule him. He pointed to a thin and tall man deep in the east side of the crowd and said, "This is Junjie, the manager of Western City. He also has many men under his command. My brothers are very close to him." Then he looked at the crowd standing in a small circle behind the pavilion and slightly frowned. He said, "Those are Uncle Mao's men. Uncle Mao has always hung around with the Chang'an local government. He is very unruly and disgusting. I am naturally not afraid of him, but since his sister-in-law is the concubine of the Registrar General of the Chang'an local government, I have to show him some respect. Those men are more troublesome. They are all retired from the city gate guards and have real martial arts. What is more troublesome is that the city gate guards themselves are very dissatisfied with me because I don't need to pay tribute to them for the freight routes I am in charge of. If I kill them, I don't know whether the city gate guards will be stupid enough to continue to make trouble." In the rainy spring night, hundreds of Chang'an heroes gathered around the Spring Breeze Pavilion in order to besiege and kill him, the leader of the biggest gang in Chang'an. However, in the face of such a situation, he very gently introduced to Ning Ke, who came tonight without leaving out anyone. He seemed to be extraordinarily patient or confident. Ning Ke lowered his voice and said, "You can introduce them, but don't introduce me. They are all Chang'an gangsters. If they know my identity, how can I live in Chang'an City? After tonight, if these people are not killed, they will probably be scared out of their wits." Old Chow of the Spring Breeze Pavilion looked at the crowd in the rainy night with his hands behind his back and said calmly, "If so, why are you still afraid of them?" Ning Ke held the umbrella and looked at his back. He explained very seriously, "I am not afraid of killing people, but I am afraid of trouble." Just when the two were talking softly under the umbrella, the crowd in the rainy night finally couldn't bear the humiliation of looking down on the heroes of Chang'an. After several discussions, they forced Lord Meng of the Southern City to speak for them. Although it seemed that Old Chow of the Spring Breeze Pavilion was bound to die, to be honest, no one dared to be presumptuous in front of him until he died. Lord Meng of the Southern City was the same. However, at this time, he had the most people and the most power, and he was suppressed by the Fish Dragon Gang the most. It was unreasonable for him to not show up. Unloading the grain, moving the warehouse, the logistical support of the military ministry, and the guard of the warehouse of the Ministry of Revenue are the most profitable secret jobs in the Tang Empire. These years, your Fish Dragon Gang has occupied all of them, and you don't even share some of the soup with your brothers. Is there really such a reason in the world? Lord Meng of the Southern City looked at Chao Xiaoshu coldly and said, "You should be very clear about what it means to offend the public. In the past, your brothers respected you because of your seniority in the Spring Breeze Pavilion. However, now that the Imperial Court wants to punish you, you are still so stubborn. Then don't blame us for being rude to you. The cultural level of people in Jianghu is never high, so they can only say these words over and over again. Years ago, I had to negotiate with people in person, and these words are really getting calluses." Standing under the umbrella, Chao Xiaoshu looked at Lord Meng of the Southern City, who was speaking with fervor and assurance, and said softly with a smile. Of course, his words were not for Lord Meng, but for Ning Ke behind him. Seeing that Chao Xiaoshu despised him so much, Lord Meng of the Southern City looked extremely gloomy. He heavily hit the ground with his crutch and shouted, "The Fish Dragon gang claims to have 3,000 cyan-robed men, but you and I both know that there are no more than 200 people who dare to fight for you. Now, your brothers who are best at fighting are all suppressed in the valiant cavalry battalion of the Yulin Royal Guards by the nobles. Tonight, I want to see how you can escape." Looking at his slightly twitching fat face, Chao Xiaoshu suddenly smiled and answered, "Let me answer your first question first. Whether it's the distribution of grain, storage, or transportation, I've monopolized these businesses for so many years. Naturally, I'm qualified to monopolize them. Whether it's you, Junjie, or Uncle Mao, none of you have the ability to monopolize these businesses. Even if these businesses were placed in front of you, you wouldn't dare to take them. You don't need to test whether I have a backup plan or not. I can tell you that none of the brothers of Spring Breeze Pavilion will come to the Spring Breeze Pavilion, and Qi Laosi is not here. Don't you feel strange? Don't feel strange, he and his brothers have gone to your home. I believe that at this time, the southern city, eastern city, and the outer house of your Uncle Mao have begun to be disturbed." As these words resounded around the dilapidated pavilion, the crowd in the rain suddenly became even more restless. They had surrounded Chao Xiaoshu here, and had sent people to track his whereabouts. Who would have thought that Chao Xiaoshu would use himself as bait to lure them here, and then send all the remaining forces of the Fish Dragon gang to their lair? Don't bring disaster to your wife and children's homes. The retreating men of the city gate guards sternly rebuked, "Chao Xiaoshu, you have gone too far." Chao Xiaoshu's face was slightly cold, and then he slightly shook his head and said, "You besieged me in front of my home. If I didn't disperse my family members in advance, does it count as bringing disaster to my home? But don't worry, I, old Chao of the Spring Breeze Pavilion, always do things according to the rules. I don't intend to kill you in front of your home and make your parents, wives, and children sad." After a short pause, he looked at the crowd and calmly said, "But after tonight, don't think about having a home in Chang'an City. Don't think about having a home in Chang'an City." Such a simple sentence made a lot of images appear in the minds of the people present. The 5 words, "Old Chao of the Spring Breeze Pavilion," was a promise of faith. If he said he wouldn't touch their families, he definitely wouldn't. However, on a slightly cold spring night, their old parents, sick wives, and children were rudely driven out of their homes, and then the houses and shops they had operated for many years were destroyed by the men in black robes of the Fish Dragon gang. Who could accept such things happening to themselves? Lord Meng's fat face twitched again. The umbrella in his hand didn't block all the rain, and this twitch actually flicked off some raindrops on his flesh. He coldly said, "No house can be built again, and the dead can't be brought back to life. As long as we kill you, old Chao of the Spring Breeze Pavilion, Jianghu will be different from then on. Chang'an City will be ours. Chang'an City will always belong to His Majesty the Emperor." Chao Xiaoshu slightly mocked and lowered his head to look at the sword at his waist. Then he raised his head to reveal a heart-warming smile and said, "Speaking of killing me, have you ever seen me fight?" Ning Ke, who was behind him, closed the oil paper umbrella and casually threw it to his feet. Then he raised his right hand to the hilt of the rain cloud behind him. Chao Xiaoshu slowly reached out his hand to hold the hilt of the sword at his waist. At the moment when his slender fingers touched the hilt of the rain-stained sword, his black robe slightly shook, and countless raindrops were flicked off into fine water powder, like a misty fog. The middle-aged man with a gentle smile suddenly became murderous, as if he had become another person. The cold raindrops around him seemed to have felt something. They swayed and tilted to avoid him silently, and no more raindrops dared to touch his black robe. Chapter 55. Over the years, the whole Chang'an City had been dominated by the Fish Dragon gang. Everyone knew that there were a group of fierce characters in the upper level of the Fish Dragon gang who were good at fighting and totally different from ordinary gang members. Chong Sanling, Chi 4 Ruthless, Lu Viheng, Fei 6 Ferocious, and Chen 7 Except for Chi 4, who climbed up from the bottom of Jianghu and was known for his viciousness, the rest of them could easily make a name for themselves in Jianghu, in West City or South City. Many people thought that they would not be satisfied with their current positions and would leave the Fish Dragon gang to seek their own opportunities, or even to betray and rise to the top. However, after so many years, these 5 men still followed their eldest brother closely and never left him, because their eldest brother was Old Chow of the Spring Breeze Pavilion. Few people in Chang'an City had seen Old Chow of the Spring Breeze Pavilion fight. To be more precise, those old people who had seen Old Chow's fight years ago were all dead. But no one dared to despise him, and no one would think that he was a paper tiger who only talked about brotherhood but had no powerful means. Because everyone knew that the sword on the waist of a character who could suppress Chong San and others could not only be a scholar's ornament. The name of Old Chow of the Spring Breeze Pavilion was a shadow floating over the heads of all his enemies. They wanted to see what kind of wind and rain he would bring when he unsheathed the sword on his waist, but no one dared to try, because they knew that once the sword was unsheathed, the Knight of Chang'an would usher in a bloody storm. Feeling that all the people on his side were shocked by Chao Xiaoshu's action of holding the sword, Lord Meng of Southern City widened his eyes and roared in a stern voice. "He is only one person, not a god. Go!" There was never a lack of hot-blooded reckless men, hidden ninjas looking for an opportunity to kill a legend in Jianghu to become famous, and followers who were encouraged by the number of companions around them. With the shout of Lord Meng in Southern City, hundreds of gang members of Chang'an City raised their steel knives and rushed over from all directions while shouting, "I just want to go home," Chao Xiaoshu said as he looked at the enemies rushing towards him. Then, with a clang, he broke through the shabby pavilion and alley in the rain. The sword at his waist was like a dragon coming out of its sheath. It looked slow, but in fact it was very fast, stabbing towards the person rushing at the front. Ning Ke looked at Chao Xiaoshu's back. His right hand had already grasped the hilt, but he did not pull out the recently sharpened padao. He wanted to see the real strength of this Chang'an legend of the night. At the same time, he felt that what Little Tree King had said was too pretentious. He was worried that he would be killed by a bolt of lightning if he pulled out his padao. The style of Chao Xiaoshu's sword was very ordinary. It was ordinary in length and width, and there was nothing special about the edge. However, at the moment when the raindrops were scattered by the high-speed sword, many fine lines could be vaguely seen on the sword. Those fine lines were not some kind of talisman, but more like several gaps filled with mercury. If a person who was too pretentious said the truth, he would be mistaken for being pretentious. Ning Ke stared at the sword and saw that the ordinary sword changed from stabbing to patting at the last moment, accurately and easily patting on the chest of that man. He finally understood that Old Chow of Spring Breeze Pavilion was not pretentious, but that this person was really pretentious. The straight sword was forcibly bent into a shape in the air by some force. Compared with its speed, the raindrops falling from the night sky were so slow that it made people's hair stand on end. However, when the sword patted on the chest of that man, that force suddenly came out from the sword and directly hit the chest of that man with a "pa" sound. A dull loud sound, as if someone had hit a heavy leather. A miserable howl abruptly stopped. The valiant member of the Southern City sect, who rushed at the front, did not even have time to see Chao Xiaoshu's face clearly before he was directly patted like a kite. He flew miserably through the air, over the shabby Spring Breeze Pavilion, and fell dozens of feet away. The hundreds of gang members who had been shouting and yelling suddenly fell silent. Their gazes subconsciously followed their companion's gaze as he drew an extremely long arc in the rainy night sky. Then, fear quickly took over their bodies, and their hands that were wielding their blades became cold. They had imagined that when old Chow of Spring Breeze Pavilion unsheathed his sword at his waist, there might be a gust of wind, and perhaps a rain of blood. But they had never imagined that a thin cyan steel sword could actually hit such a heavy person and send him flying so far. The terrifying power contained in a wave of the thin sword was like a big hammer in the hands of a deity, which could shake the heaven and the earth. No, that sword was not an iron hammer in the hands of a deity, but more like a steel whip in the hands of an immortal envoy. Those Jianghu men who rushed to Cao Xiaoshu's side were shocked by this thunderous blow and froze on the spot. However, Cao Xiaoshu did not stop moving forward in the rain. He walked confidently with his sword in his hand. With every step he took, he lifted his wrist slightly and swung his sword. When he swung his sword, the flat and thin body of the sword buzzed and bent to the extreme. It was like a steel whip that whistled and danced, carrying raindrops and cool wind. With every swing of the sword, a figure was sent flying. When the sword reached the chest, someone flew to the alley wall, spitting blood and sliding down. When the sword reached the leg, someone turned over and slid through the night sky, spitting blood and falling to the ground. When the sword was waved to break the rain, a dull buzzing sound was heard, and the figures kept flying out. Miserable howls and fearful voices resounded in the previously dead silent Spring Breeze Pavilion. Cao Xiaoshu waved his sword all the way. His movements were relaxed and casual, and could even be described as careless. The expression on his face did not change at all, and he was as calm as usual, as if he was driving away mosquitoes in the summer. Ning Ke, who blindly followed behind him, could no longer keep calm, and a touch of shock flashed through his bright eyes in the night rain. Cao Xiaoshu used the thin sword to send the enemy flying instead of choosing the simpler and more energy-saving way to stab the enemy to death. Ning Ke was a little puzzled at first, but now he understood that this was the only way Cao Xiaoshu could always keep an empty space around him and avoid being surrounded by his opponent. But such a domineering and even arrogant way of fighting obviously consumed a lot of energy and physical strength. If Cao Xiaoshu did not intend to use this way to intimidate the hundreds of fierce men on the spot, then he was confident that he could directly slap all the enemies to death. Ning Ke looked at the back of Cao Xiaoshu, at the middle-aged man who was arrogantly moving forward in the night rain, at the howls of the men who were sent flying under his sword, and at the people who were moaning in the muddy water in the distance. He pursed his lips and thought, "I know you are strong, but I did not expect you to be so strong." The few big shots of Chang, and city, who were hiding in the crowd had long been scared out of their wit. Today they finally saw old Chow of Spring Breeze Pavilion use his sword, but they would rather have never seen it in their lives. Usually, they lived well under the shadow of the Fish Dragon Gang, thinking that the gap between the two sides was not big, and that if they risked their lives, they would still have the power to fight. But at this moment, in the cold spring rain, these people bitterly found that the reality was so cruel. They could live only because the Fish Dragon Gang and the middle-aged man did not even bother to take a second look at them. A legend was a legend. Whether in Jianghu, brothels or officialdom, those who could become legends in people's memory must have their reasons for becoming legends, and this would not change just because the legend had not appeared for many years. Chapter 56. Seeing their subordinates, who were usually valiant, being slapped away by the middle-aged man with a light wave of his sleeves, and seeing the man getting closer and closer, Lord Meng, Junjie, and Uncle Mao, who were ambitious and ruthless people in South City and West City, began to tremble slightly and could not suppress the strong desire to retreat. However, thinking of the real nobles standing behind them and the two real strongmen in the mansion, they gritted their teeth and let out the fiercest roar, "Let's rush up and surround him! Flying axes!" The roar reverberated in the streets around Spring Breeze Pavilion. Strangely, upon hearing the words "surround him," The gang members who had mustered up their remaining courage and rushed forward with steel knives and howled dispersed at the fastest speed, trying their best to stay away from Chao Xiaoshu and Ning Quebec. The crowd in front of them dispersed, revealing 2 rows of strong men. Those men had coarse cloth belts tied around their waists, in which there were 4 small axes clamped between the cloth belts, and 2 of them were already holding small axes in their hands, ready to throw them out. The people of the Tang Empire worshipped martial arts, and there was a swift and fierce atmosphere flowing between the imperial court and the common people. Therefore, the capital of Chang did not prohibit carrying swords. Even weapons like padeos, as long as you did not take them out and wander around in the busy marketplace, the government would not care. However, the control of long-range weapons like bows and arrows was relatively strict, especially the powerful crossbow, which was strictly prohibited among the common people. In this case, dozens of flying axes breaking through the air became the most terrible means. Since the fighting in the rainy night until now, the calm expression on Chao Xiaoshu's face changed for the first time. He looked at the 2 rows of flying axes under the distant wall without fear or even vigilance. He just slightly frowned and seemed to feel that it was a little troublesome. He shook his head and said, "You know what to do." This sentence was naturally said to Ning Ke, but Ning Ke did not know what to do at this time. If the opponent's flying axes flew like raindrops, he believed that he could escape, but he also believed that Chao Xiaoshu would not choose to leave before killing or defeating all the enemies. At this moment, looking at Chao Xiaoshu's back, he suddenly thought of the battle at the entrance of Northern Mountain Road and the words of Liu Qinchen, and a touch of surprise flashed in his eyes. As if hearing the shocked voice in his mind, the thin cyan steel sword in Chao Xiaoshu's hand made a buzzing sound and vibrated at a terrifying speed, shaking all the rainwater and blood on the sword into powder. Then with a swoosh, it disappeared and turned into a gray flowing shadow tearing the curtain of rain, flying towards the 2 rows of flying axes. It was like a faint gray shadow, but it was actually a swift sword. The traces of the sword were subtle and subtle. Wherever the sword pointed, the raindrops that seemed to be hanging in the night sky would be pierced through. The sword pierced through the outermost layer of the raindrop's skin, pierced through its heart, and pierced through the outermost layer of the human body's skin, pierced through its flesh and bones, and pierced out again. The fingers that were tightly gripping the handle of the axe fell off like lotus roots, and then blood began to spurt out from the wound. In front of the wall in the alley, only the sound of the sword tip piercing through the raindrops and the sound of fingers being cut off could be heard. Countless fingers that were tightly holding the axes fell along with the raindrops, and then the heavy axes fell to the ground one after another, making muffled sounds when they hit the ground full of rainwater. Finally, innumerable screams were heard. 2 axes with the fastest reactions and movements had already thrown the axes in their hands when old Chao of Spring Breeze Pavilion raised his sword. However, in a split second, the gray sword shadow swept through their wrists, and only blood could be seen. They actually threw out their hands together with the axes, and then drew a mournful line of blood and sadly fell to the ground not far away. The scene looked extremely bloody. The Spring Breeze Pavilion under the night rain was dead silent. Standing in the rain, Chao Xiaoshu looked at the hundreds of Chang and gang members around him and watched the screams caused by his flying sword appearing and disappearing from time to time. His face was calm and unmoved. Lord Meng of Southern City, with a pale face, pointed at Chao Xiaoshu outside the pavilion tremblingly and screamed like a crazy woman, "Chao Xiaoshu! Chao Xiaoshu! Chao Xiaoshu, how could you be a cultivator? How could you be a great sword master? What kind of person do you need by your side? Fast enough, fierce enough, and brave enough. You can't blink when killing people, and you can't let anything fall on me." Ning Ke stared at the back of Chao Xiaoshu in front of him, and saw the middle-aged man's slightly trembling hands hanging outside the cyan thin sleeves. His body could not help but feel a little stiff. The thin sword turned into a silent gray shadow, which finally proved his guess, and he finally understood the previous conversation in the shop. In the battle at the entrance of Northern Mountain Road, the great sword master abandoned by the academy had a close warrior beside him. After Liu Qingchen lured the great sword master to death, he killed the warrior's close warrior immediately. It was because cultivators like sword masters and psyche masters were most afraid of being killed at close range in a battle, just like old Chao of Spring Breeze Pavilion, who finally showed his real strength at this time. At this moment, Chao Xiaoshu's mind and primordial qi were all tied on the unpredictable flying sword. It seemed to be extremely powerful, but he had lost all his defensive ability without the sword in his hand. If someone on the opposite side could break through the flying sword at this time, or quietly approach him to launch a sneak attack, he would be in great danger. Presumably, when Chao Xiaoshu was in those dangerous battles in the past, he must have had those rumored fierce brothers by his side as his personal attendants. However, tonight, his brothers were all locked up in their respective camps by the government. Therefore, he needed to find someone he could trust and who was strong enough to protect his personal safety. So he went to Lin 47th Street in the dripping spring rain and walked into the calligraphy shop called Old Brush Pen Shop. Standing on the wet ground outside the threshold, he looked at the lad who was sighing and eating noodles and said with a smile, "I'm going to kill someone. I need a person by my side." Chao Xiaoshu only knew what Ning Ke had done, but he did not know what kind of person he was. However, there was no doubt that it was a gamble to entrust his safety and even his life to Ning Ke casually. This gamble, or trust, made Ning Ke feel a little heavy on his shoulders. He took a deep breath and slightly tightened his right hand between his thumb and index finger. He grasped the hilt of the slanted blade on his back and slowly pulled out the snow-white and traceless padao. The rainwater fell on the ground and was quickly stained by the accumulated dust. It gradually converged into a stream and flowed into the sewers by the street, and was soon smelled by the years of mud. This was exactly the environment that rats in Chang'an City loved the most. A rat with festering fur used its two dirty black front paws to pounce on a severed human finger, chewing on it excitedly. Occasionally, it would stop to lick the blood on its fur. It had nothing to do with the killing of the humans that happened in its high view. It only hoped that the faint shadow would cut off a few more fingers, hoping that the rain would wash those fingers to its front. "Master Haotian, please bless us. Our family's food for the next few days will depend on you." With a bang, a lump of something whizzed over and smashed right in front of the rat, splashing dirty water and blood all over the ground. "Master Haotian thinks that I'm too greedy, so he wants to smash me to death?" The rat quickly ran away in horror. When it was about to get into the rat hole at the foot of the courtyard wall, it reluctantly looked back at the finger that was about to be gnawed into bones. Then it resolutely swung its tail and got into the hole. If it looked carefully and found that the lump of something splashing rainwater and blood was a human head, it would definitely regret its decision. After the rat got out of the rat hole, it could no longer regret. At the moment when it was trampled into meat paste by the hard military boot of the Tang army, it didn't know whether its regret was that it couldn't tell its kind how delicious human flesh was. An elite soldier of the Tang army slowly took back his feet wearing military boot. He glanced at the bloody rat at his feet and listened to the sounds outside the courtyard wall. He slowly returned to the ranks and used hand gestures to describe the situation of the battle outside to his colleague. Then he looked down at the crossbow in his hand to make sure that the rainwater didn't cause any problem with the spring. Dozens of elite soldiers of the Tang army wearing dark raincoats stood silently behind the courtyard wall, holding crossbows in their hands. Outside the dilapidated Spring Breeze Pavilion, the sounds of fighting shook the sky, but no one noticed their existence. These soldiers were as silent as a group of stone statues. Neither the wind nor the rain nor the fighting could change the expression on their faces. Behind these elite soldiers of the Tang army, Two people were sitting on the wooden floor of the pavilion that was covered by layers of rain curtains. One of them was a middle-aged man with clear eyebrows and eyes, wearing a starry white gown. A small sword was quietly placed on the wooden floor beside him. The other person was wearing a bamboo hat, so his face couldn't be seen. But judging from the monk's robe he wore, his wide and dirty bare feet, and the copper bowl under the eaves in front of him, he should be an ascetic monk. The swordsman in the long gown slightly frowned and looked at the silky curtain of rain in front of him. He said softly, "He's actually a sword master. No wonder the two of us are needed." The ascetic monk lowered his head and didn't speak. He listened to the indistinct sound of the flying sword breaking through the air and chopping the rain outside the wall. He stared at the copper bowl under the wooden steps and saw the rainwater in the bowl disturbed by the new raindrop. Gradually, he felt that his ocean of chi also became a little uneasy. So he lowered his head and slowly and firmly pulled out the ironwood prayer beads on his wrist. This mansion was the Chow Mansion, the mansion of Old Chow of the Spring Breeze Pavilion. This wooden building was the rain listening building, the small building where Old Chow of the Spring Breeze Pavilion listened to the rain when he was idle and disguised as a scholar. These elite soldiers of the Tang army and these two powerhouses were waiting for him to return home. On the other side of the courtyard wall of the Chow Mansion, at the entrance of the alley where the spring rain was pattering, two carriages were parked. The handsome horses in front of the carriages were a little impatient because of the rain. They wanted to snort from time to time but couldn't make a sound. They wanted to stamp their forehoofs twice but dared not move. One carriage was deathly silent, while the other carriage was deep and low coughs from time to time. No one knew who was in the two carriages. But if Chow Xiaoshu could see the middle-aged fat man standing beside the carriage, he would definitely be able to guess that the person in the carriage was not an ordinary person. The seemingly ordinary middle-aged fat man was not famous in Chang'an. He didn't have any official status, but many officials would try to curry favor with him when they saw him. Because many people knew that he was the one who handled some inconvenient things for His Highness the Prince. However, such a person, who was more powerful than the Prime Minister's housekeeper, dared not sit in the carriage to avoid the rain even though he was drenched in the cold spring rain. He stood outside the carriage with his waist slightly bent and his attitude was particularly humble. Chapter 57. It was a cold rainy night in Spring Breeze Pavilion, in the alley outside the Chow Mansion. The middle-aged fat man stood beside the carriage in the rain, bending down and whispering, "Chow Xiaoshu is indeed a cultivator, and his state is not low. Now the situation is a bit tricky." The man in the carriage coughed twice and said indifferently, "What's the hurry? Aren't there two foreigners invited by the Ministry of Revenue in the mansion? If even they can't stop that Jianghu guy, it won't be too late for us to take action. As for those Jianghu people, it doesn't matter if they die. How many rats don't die in the sewers of Chang'an?" Hundreds of brave Jianghu men of Chang'an poured in from all directions. They were like rats in the sewers in the eyes of the super-mundane sublime being, but at this critical moment of life and death, they showed amazing fighting power and courage. However, Old Chow of Spring Breeze Pavilion was a cultivator, and they were just ordinary Jianghu people. The gap between their strength was like that between an eagle and an ant. The shadow of the sword pierced through their legs and brought out a spray of blood. The man holding the axe had his fingers cut off, and the man wielding the knife fell down in the rain. No matter how strong their fighting power was, it was not worth mentioning in front of the shadow of the sword. No matter how strong their courage was, they would collapse in despair after their companions fell down from time to time. Chow Xiaoshu walked calmly, his indigo robe already wet by the rain. However, no one would think that the first man of Chang'an at night was embarrassed, just like every time Ning Ke saw him. He walked in the spring rain as naturally as the spring rain, and the aura he exuded was like the spring rain that moistened the earth, making people unable to resist or even unwilling to resist. The gang members from the west and south of Chang'an City looked at the middle-aged man walking in the rain. It was as if they had seen a demon nodding to them in a gentle and elegant manner, and then raising his devil claws to easily crush them into pieces. They were so shocked that they could no longer suppress the fear in their hearts. Someone shouted, and the crowd finally dispersed. Lord Meng of South City, Xuanjie of West City, and Uncle Cat of South City had quietly slipped away. Except for those corpses washed by the rain and those seriously injured and groaning around the dilapidated Spring Breeze Pavilion, no one could be seen standing. It was quiet between heaven and earth. If you ignored those corpses and the injured in the rain, the bloody smell that even the rain could not wash away, and the corner of Spring Breeze Pavilion that had been smashed. Ning Ke silently followed behind Chao Xiaoshu. He gripped the hilt of his sword with both hands, and the shining blade was held horizontally in front of his chest. From beginning to end, he did not strike once, and this one-sided massacre was over. But he did not relax, nor did he feel embarrassed or apologetic, because he knew that the real danger had yet to come. If you had the chance to fight with a cultivator, then the enemy you encountered was very likely to be one or even several cultivators. Step by step, Chao Xiaoshu walked to the door of his house. There was no sword in the sheath beside him. The sword was traveling in the rain somewhere. He stretched out his empty hands and gently pushed the door. The rain-soaked door shaft made a strange moan. The courtyard door was pushed open, and dozens of elite soldiers of the Tang army wearing dark-colored ponchos greeted them with bows and crossbows, with resolute and indifferent expressions. On the wooden floor of the rain-savoring building behind the curtain of rain, the middle-aged man wearing a starry white gown slightly frowned, and the short sword beside him made a low sound. The sadhu wearing a bamboo hat slowly raised his head, and the prayer beads in his hand slightly stiffened. The two horse carriages at the far end of the alley were still quiet, and no one knew where the sound of coughing in one of the carriages went. It was still quiet. The slight sound of the wind lingered between the leaves and the pillars, and the pitter-patter of the rain fell on the courtyard and the small pond. They looked at each other, and no one chose to make the first move. The silence might be long, or it might be short. Chao Xiaoshu's gaze passed over the group of soldiers holding crossbows, and fell on the sadhu and swordsman in the building. He said indifferently, "This is my home, please go out." "No one will go out," the swordsman wearing a starry white gown calmly replied. Chao Xiaoshu looked at the short sword beside the swordsman, and seemed to be thinking of something. He suddenly asked, "Was it you who killed my little brother in the rain a few days ago?" The swordsman in the long gown leaned forward slightly, indicating that he was that person. Chao Xiaoshu slightly raised the corner of his mouth, looked at him and said, "Then you will be the first to die today." The rain had been falling, flowing down along the roof tiles and eaves of the rain-savoring building, turning into a curtain of water. The copper bowl in front of the sadhu had been holding the rainwater, gradually accumulating more and more, and finally overflowing at this moment. Chao Xiaoshu made his move. He raised his right arm and pointed at the swordsman in the long gown in the rain-savoring building through the heavy curtain of rain and the elite soldiers of the Tang army who were ready to fight with crossbows. As he pointed, a shrill whistle suddenly sounded in the rainy night. The thin sword that had always been hidden in the night and spring rain finally showed its trace, breaking through the air from the rain-savoring building like lightning. The pupils of the swordsman in the long gown shrank sharply, and the middle finger of his right hand hanging beside him buckled and flicked. The short sword beside him, which was ready to leap out, shook its sheath with a clear sound, and turned into a clear light to protect in front of him. Chao Xiaoshu said that he would be the first to die today, and Chao Xiaoshu also pointed at him through the curtain of rain. However, the target of Chao Xiaoshu's first sword was not him, but the sadhu beside him. Although the sadhu remained silent, he had been vigilantly watching the movements around him. He knew that Chao Xiaoshu had already made a move when there was a slight fluctuation of the qi of heaven and earth in the sky. Although he did not know that he was the target of this sword, his instinct as a disciple of the Buddhism sect made him slap the wooden board beside him with his withered palm. Smoke and dust shook in the cracks of the wooden board. The copper bowl in front of the wooden steps seemed to be kicked by someone, and suddenly bounced up, making countless splashes in the air. The faint gray sword shadow pierced through the air and penetrated the crystal-clear glass-like spray of water. However, it was blocked by the copper bowl. The sharp and high-speed thin sword collided with the clumsy and thick copper bowl, producing an ear-splitting sound. The face of the sadhu, which was exposed outside the bamboo hat, was a little dark, and became extremely pale at this moment. It was obvious that he had suffered some losses. At this moment, the swordsman in the long gown raised his eyebrows and quickly turned his wrist, pointing at Chao Xiaoshu, who was standing at the entrance of the mansion with his index and middle finger. The short sword that had just flown half a circle around him suddenly changed direction, turning into a green light and piercing Chao Xiaoshu's face. At this moment, Chao Xiaoshu's flying sword was colliding with the sadhu's copper bowl, so how could he protect himself? Ning Ke, who had been standing silently behind Chao Xiaoshu with his long knife hilt, moved. His body quickly flashed to the left, and just as he was about to flash out of Chao Xiaoshu's body, he forced himself to stop. He was not afraid of the swordsman in the long gown, nor was he afraid of the green light of the short sword, but he found that he still did not need to do anything. After Chao Xiaoshu's flying sword collided with the sadhu's copper alms bowl, it didn't break out of the alms bowl, but it didn't fall to the ground either. Instead, with the help of the violent impact, the inexplicable lines on the thin cyan steel sword suddenly expanded and separated. They magically turned into 5 extremely thin sword pieces in the air and shot out. Something could be born out of nothing. Again and again and again and again became 5. Chao Xiaoshu's one sword turned into 5. Chapter 58. Chao Xiaoshu's one sword turned into 5. 3 sword blades whistled as they bypassed the copper alms bowl and shot towards the sadhu's body. The other 2 sword blades did not return to their own bodies. Instead, they completely ignored the swordsman's cyan light dagger and pierced towards his face. Even though it was a battle between cultivators, the middle-aged man in the cyan robe was still imbued with the fierceness and cruelty of Jianghu in Chang'an. If you kill me, you will die. I have practiced in Jianghu in Chang'an for many years and am not afraid of death. You have practiced under the protection of famous mountains and great rivers for many years. Are you afraid of death? The swordsman in the cyan robe was afraid of death. With a pale face, he put his fingers together to make a sword gesture and forcibly recalled the green light dagger that had just flown half an arrow away. At the most dangerous moment, he deflected the 2 sword pieces that were attacking his eyes. This action made his right hand tremble slightly, and blue veins could be vaguely seen on the back of his white hand. The sadhu next to him looked solemnly at the 3 sword pieces that were attacking his body. It was too late to recall the heavy copper bowl to protect himself. He clumsily uttered a vague word, and the prayer beads on his left hand floated up and whirled around his body. Sparks splashed everywhere. In an instant, he did not know how many times he had collided with the 3 sword pieces that were moving strangely. The sword shadow broke through the air, the copper bowl swayed the water, and the green light dagger stabbed at the mansion gate. The gray sword shadow turned into 5 sword pieces, and the green light dagger flew back like lightning. The prayer beads floated in the air to protect it. Every part contained terrible dangers. If one part was not handled properly, one of the 3 strongmen would bleed and die. In the world of the strongmen, the scale of time was different. This seemingly complicated, dangerous, and long process was only a very short moment in the real world. At that time, the water splashed out of the copper bowl was still turning into pieces of colored glass in the air, and had not fallen down. The rain in the courtyard was still slowly weaving a curtain of rain. However, the Tang elites with crossbows did not react at all. Tut, tut, tut. The Tang elites reacted as quickly as possible and pulled the trigger quickly. Dozens of arrows were shot at the mansion gate with a strong sound of breaking through the air. At this time, the 5 sword pieces were fighting with the 2 cultivators in the rain-savoring building. Chao Xiaoshu had no ability to protect himself and could only be shot like a hedgehog by those crossbow arrows. At this moment, when the crossbow arrows were about to reach Chao Xiaoshu, a snow-white knife light illuminated the courtyard, and the layers of rain curtain were clearly illuminated, and the dense crossbow arrows were all swept away. The soles of Ning Kei's boots stepped into the puddles at the front door of the Chao mansion, as if they had been nailed into the ground. His hands, which were holding the hilt of the long knife, were as firm as steel. Ning Kei did not know when he had moved to the front of Chao Xiaoshu. The muscles on his wrists and forearms tightened and relaxed at an unimaginable speed, causing the bright padao to spin rapidly around his wrist. It turned into a silver round shield, illuminating the old black mask on his face and shaking off the dense crossbow bolts. At this moment, the teenager, who had experienced countless life and death battles over the years, perfectly displayed the sense of danger and judgment that had been honed by those great terrors. Those seemingly extremely dangerous crossbow bolts brushed past his earlobes, penetrated the hem of his clothes, and fiercely stabbed into the cracks of the rain-soaked bluestone slabs, not causing any damage. Following this order, the elite soldiers of the Tang army who had fired a round of arrows were divided into 2 groups. One group quickly pulled the reins and loaded the arrows, while the other group of soldiers pulled out the steel sabers from their waists and silently rushed toward the main gate of the Chao mansion. Clang! 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 An ace of the Tang army stepped on the wet ground as if he had followed the last round of crossbow bolt. When he was still some distance away from the mansion gate, he roared and leaped high with a knife in his hands, chopping down at Ning Kei's head with an unstoppable momentum. The rainy night was dark and deep, and there was a faint light in the building. When the saber was raised, the blade reflected the light, and when it moved, it became a smooth surface. If the saber light disappeared without a trace, then there was only one possibility, and that was that the saber was currently in a stationary state. The ordinary padao in his hand was now stuck in the neck of the Tang expert, the padao deeply wedged about half the distance between the neck and the neck. The blade cut through the skin and was tightly clamped by the bone and flesh. Blood gushed out from the tiny cut and was quickly washed away by the rain. Ning Kei's left hand was holding the bottom end of the hilt and his right hand was holding the hilt backwards. He slightly lowered his head and looked at a droplet of rain splashing on the bluestone, maintaining the posture of bending his knees and turning his waist. Time seemed to stop at this moment, but it would not really stop. Ning Kei pulled his left arm as fast as lightning, and the blade made a painful sound on the neck of the Tang ace. It was the sound of the metal rubbing against the strong neck bones. As the ace fell down with his eyes wide open, Ning Kei held the hilt tightly with his left hand and pushed forward. The blade suddenly jumped up with the rain and pierced the throat of the second enemy. He crossed his hands to hold the long hilt of the plain knife. His footsteps were like a leopard in the grass, leaping and evading in an extremely small range. Ning Kei cut horizontally and cut down the enemy coming from the left. Then he turned around and suddenly exerted his strength. The blade cut through the curtain of rain, cut off the blade that came from the knight, and cut off half of the shoulder of the fourth enemy. As soon as they met, 4 elite soldiers of the Tang army died under his knife. Blood sprayed everywhere from their broken bodies, which seemed to be denser than the rain. Ning Kei kept his promise and did not let a single person or arrow hurt Chao Xiaoshu's body. As for the increasingly majestic rain, it was not something he cared about. The 3 cultivators were engaged in a life-and-death battle with the Qi of heaven and earth as the stage. The elite soldiers of the Tang army thought that they had seized the best opportunity to strike. However, they did not expect that the lad standing silently behind Chao Xiaoshu was such a fierce character. Perhaps they were shocked by Ning Kei's sharp and strange bladesmanship. The black mask in the eyes of the elite soldiers of the Tang army became a little scary, and they subconsciously slowed down their step. Ning Kei held the cutlass with both hands. His black mask, which had been soaked by the rain, rose and fell slowly. He frowned. The Tang army was the most disciplined and powerful army in the world. The soldiers who appeared in Chao Mansion tonight were the elite soldiers of the Tang army. No matter how powerful and terrible the enemy was, as long as the superior did not give the order to retreat, they would not retreat. As long as there was no military order, even if there was a bottomless abyss in front of them, they would bravely rush over and would never slow down their steps. Swoosh, 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 swoosh. 3 extremely subtle sounds of springs were heard. The heavy rain fell down and hit the roof of the rain-savoring building. The hard bluestone slabs made a thunder-like sound, which successfully covered the 3 subtle sounds. But Ning Kei did not relax. He stared at the elite soldiers of the Tang army, who seemed to be afraid and defeated. He held the hilt of his cutlass tightly and listened attentively to any sound in the rainy night. Therefore, he captured the 3 subtle sounds of springs at the first moment and made his own judgment at the same time. Shenhou crossbow. Shenhou crossbow was the most terrifying weapon carried by individual soldiers of the Tang army. It had a built-in crossbow box and could shoot 10 crossbow bolts at one time. What was more terrifying was that the springs of the Shenhou crossbow were specially designed to shoot crossbow bolts at an extremely fast speed. This kind of weapon had created countless glories in the history of the Tang Empire's conquest of the world. It was a pity that the special steel needed to make the Shenhou crossbow was gradually withdrawn from the standard equipment of the Tang army. Unexpectedly, it appeared tonight. The elite soldiers of the Tang army, who were lying in ambush in Chao Mansion, did not use the Shenhou crossbow at first because they did not have the confidence to kill Chao Xiaoshu in a good state with the Shenhou crossbow. And the teenager wearing the black mask was not worth using the Shenhou crossbow to deal with. They had wanted to use ordinary crossbow bolts with the sadhu and the long-robed swordsman to gradually exhaust Chao Xiaoshu's strength and finally use the Shenhou crossbow to launch a fatal blow. But the situation at present did not allow them to do so, because without the Shenhou crossbow, they could not even kill the teenager wearing the black mask, let alone Chao Xiaoshu. A drop of rain the size of a soybean fell from the top of the black mask to the bottom. In such a short period of time, Ning Kei had understood so many things. At the same time, his left hand had already quietly left the slender hilt and reached behind him. His fingertips were about to touch the big black umbrella wrapped in coarse cloth. He was not one of those powerful cultivators. He was just an ordinary teenager. Although countless bloody battles had made him somewhat extraordinary, he still did not have the confidence to deal with the Shenhou crossbow with just the padao in his hand. At this moment, a series of subtle but crisp sounds rang out in the Chao Mansion in the rain. These sounds were more crisp than the sound of raindrops falling on the strings of a zither, and faster than the wild bees dancing in the air when the most mysterious zither player plucked them. Ding 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 ding. Ding ding ding. Ding ding ding. Ding ding. 5 extremely dim sword shadows had quietly returned from the rain-savoring building. They shuttled back and forth in the courtyard at high speed like wild bees, weaving an impenetrable net. As if they had intelligence, they accurately captured the shooting trajectory of each crossbow bolt from the Shenhou crossbow, intercepting all the 10 crossbow bolts and knocking them away one by one. Chao Xiaoshu stood in the rain. His slightly pale face showed no emotion except calmness. His right hand, which was hanging outside his sleeve, slowly opened. The 5 sword fragments flew back to him with a whooshing sound, enveloping the surroundings and flying at high speed. The rainwater around the 2 was cut by the aura of the sword fragments, revealing streaks of white lines. Chapter 59. The 5 sword blades flew at a high speed in the rainy night, making a low and sharp whistling sound, like some strange musical instruments. Each of them occupied a space beside Chao Xiaoshu and Ning Ke, and then kept changing positions. 5 streams of flowing light connected with each other, and filled the courtyard space between the rain-splashed green branches and the puddled bluestone slabs. The sword blades flew smoothly and gracefully in the rain. Sometimes they brushed the floor, splashed rainwater, sometimes they cut deep sword marks on the wall, and sometimes they flew over the bodies of the 4 soldiers who had been cut down by Ning Ke, adding a few more bloody marks on them. The soldiers who were still alive would twitch when they were cut by the sword blades. Chao Xiaoshu and Ning Ke stood in the invisible sword net made by the 5 sword blades. Every line of the net represented unstoppable and death. Whether it was the hard bluestone slabs, the rain-soaked walls, or the corpses of the Tang soldiers lying on the ground, they could not slow down or soften the lines. The wind, the rain, and the night could enter, but no one could enter. No one dared to step into the invisible net that covered a radius of 30 feet. Even the bravest elite of the Tang army would not force their way in, knowing that they would die. As for the sadhu and the long-robed swordsmen in the rain-savoring building, their faces were pale, and they hurried to regulate their breath. The prayer beads in the copper bowl, and the short sword with green light were floating quietly around them. The long-robed swordsman from the South Jin Kingdom looked at Chao Xiaoshu in the rain with a shocked expression. He said bitterly, "I can't believe that a gang leader in Chang'an is a great sword master at the upper level of see-through state, and even is only 1 step away from the knowing destiny state. Is this the strength and foundation of the Tang Empire? However, you should know very well that killing you is the idea of the nobles of the Tang Empire. You can't win. The nobles have said that as long as you are willing to surrender, they will spare your life." Chao Xiaoshu raised his left hand and plucked a green leaf from his wet lapel. Then he looked up at the long-robed swordsman and said calmly, "You killed my brother. So whether you surrender or not, you must die." The long-robed swordsman was silent. The sadhu wearing a bamboo hat looked at Ning Ke, who was standing beside Chao Xiaoshu. He looked at the black mask on his face and the familiar but slightly weird bun. He frowned and asked, "Young man, are you from the Yueluan kingdom?" Ning Ke looked back at the sadhu in silence. He did not make any response, but he frowned slightly on his black mask. Chao Xiaoshu looked at the elites of the Tang army at the other end of the courtyard. His eyes gradually turned cold, and he said in a low voice, "One is a great sword master from the South Jin Kingdom, the other is an ascetic monk from the Yueluan Kingdom, and you are soldiers of the Tang Empire. For the sake of those so-called nobles, you actually colluded with foreigners. It's really shameful." The leader of the Tang army lowered his head slightly, as if he did not want to be blinded by the majestic rain, or was a little ashamed, unable to look at Chao Xiaoshu's cold and threatening eyes. As long as there were strong cultivators participating in the battle, the whole battle must be controlled by the cultivator. Ordinary people like Ning Ke and the elites of the Tang army could only help from the side and could not influence the course of the battle. In a battle, cultivators' spirit, physical strength, and most importantly, psyche power were consumed extremely quickly. When they could not defeat the enemy with one blow, they often chose to retreat temporarily and adjust their breath. Previously, the Tang army used the Shenhou crossbow. Chao Xiaoshu was worried that Ning Ke could not deal with it, so he took the risk to recall the sword pieces. That was the reason for the simple conversation in the rainy night. "Let this matter end." Chao Xiaoshu said this calmly, and then raised his right arm to point at the direction of the rain-tasting tower. His state of strength was above the sadhu of the Yueluan Kingdom and the swordsman of the South Jin Kingdom, so he had the strength and the right to choose when to start the battle. It was at this moment. The 5 sword pieces shuttling and flying at high speed in the courtyard seemed to have heard a clear order. Their trajectory suddenly changed, and the whistling suddenly became sharper. They broke through the rainy night and stabbed at the rain-tasting tower. The sadhu's face suddenly tightened and his eyes widened. His hands quickly changed the emblematic gesture between his knees. The copper bowl floating in front of him flew up to meet the enemy with a buzzing sound. The string of ironwood prayer beads also flew up and rotated at high speed around his body. The swordsman of the South Jin Kingdom gave a muffled groan. His face was as pale as snow, but his lips were as red as blood. His psyche power entered the breath of nature inside and outside the rain-tasting tower through the acupoints of the ocean of chi and mountain of snow, and controlled the azure dagger to fly up like lightning. Something's wrong. The sadhu's pupils suddenly shrank. Those gray sword shadows seemed indistinct under the cover of the majestic spring rain. It was not until the whistling flew to the rain-tasting tower that he saw clearly that there were only 4, not 5. Where did the last sword piece go? The sadhu wanted to remind the swordsman of the South Jin Kingdom beside him, but it was too late. A very faint sword shadow quietly bypassed the eaves and beams of the rain-tasting tower, avoiding the perception of the 2 people in the tower. It slid down the wooden pillar, and then suddenly accelerated at the height of half a person, penetrating the extremely thick wooden pillar like a hot knife cutting through snow. The next moment, it appeared behind the head of the swordsman of the South Jin Kingdom. The swordsman of the South Jin Kingdom felt the chill at the back of his head, and a great fear arose in his heart. His hands hanging outside his sleeves waved wildly. The azure dagger in the air suddenly stopped, but it could not save its master. With a slight muffled sound, the sword piece pierced into the back of his head, and then pierced through his throat. With blood and flesh hanging on it, it flew out crookedly like a strange bloodthirsty worm. The swordsman of the South Jin Kingdom stared at Cao Xiaoshu in the rain. He covered his bleeding throat and leaned back heavily. Until the moment of his death, he finally confirmed that his opponent's recovery speed was indeed far beyond his. With its master dead, the azure dagger, which had lost the control of psyche power, fell into the rain, bounced twice, and then became motionless. The 2 sword shards that were fighting with the jade-green dagger whistled and combined with the other 3 sword shards, attacking the sadhu's body at high speed. They were just 5 extremely dim dots, but they were like a violent storm. In the rain, the 5 sharp sword pieces kept colliding with the hard and heavy copper bowl, and with the high-speed dancing ironwood prayer bead. The crisp, harsh, and sonorous sounds intertwined, as if there was no interruption. The dandelion-like golden flowers around the sadhu bloomed from time to time, and were scattered by the cool wind from time to time. In an instant, countless holes appeared on the sadhu's old monk's robe. Buddhist sadhu were not used to wearing soft armor to protect their bodies like ordinary cultivators. Blood seeped out of the holes, turning him into a bloody man. Cao Xiaoshu looked at the rain-savoring building quietly. His hands hanging outside his sleeves did not move, but the 5 sword pieces in the building were like his 5 invisible fingers, plucking and plucking the strings of death from time to time. Cao Xiaoshu's face, washed by the rain, was paler than before. He raised his eyebrows slightly and found that the sadhu's willpower was more determined than he had expected. He lifted the front lapel of his green robe, completely ignoring the rain of arrows around him and the elite soldiers of the Tang army who were shouting and charging at him. He just sat down in the heavy rain. He stood at the doorstep of his own mansion, staring at the enemy in his building. His sword-like eyebrows gradually became flat, and the 5 slender fingers of his right hand outside his sleeves suddenly tightened. With this action, the 5 unpredictable sword pieces in the building gathered with a shrill whistle and once again condensed into one sword. Without any fancy moves, it directly pierced towards the copper bowl. At this moment, on the other side of the wall, at the corner of the street that had been washed by the pouring rain until it was quiet and devoid of people, one of the 2 carriages finally began to move slowly. It drove towards the main gate of the Chow Manor. The sound of hooves and wheels was covered by the wind and rain without a trace. You're tuning in to the Phoenix Nights YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.